of private schools, many are forced to attend government-funded institutions, which in the past have suffered from poor infrastructure, lower education standards, and high student-to-teacher ratios. But Dr. Praveen Kumar is trying to change that.
I am currently working as head of Telangana Social Welfare Residential Schools. So totally above 400 schools I manage. These are all residential schools for the students who are historically marginalized but talented and then poor.
My friend also
Of them, 60% are girls and then 40% are boys, because girls are more marginalized among the marginalized. Their voices are always suppressed. My approach to improve the conditions in the schools has been put your eyes and ears on the ground always. Talk to the parents, talk to the teachers, talk to the students, stay in the schools and then understand their problems, their challenges, both in classrooms and then the corridors and the dorms. Then go to the dining halls and see what kind of food they are eating, and then go to their homes and then what kind of food they are getting and what kind of challenges the parents have. Very good. 9th class. One of the important changes that I brought in after I took over was to complete the transformation of mother tongue to English medium, because English medium, as I said, English is the language of emancipation. A language that connects you to the whole body of knowledge in the world. So we had to train a lot of teachers.
refer to the dictionary also, okay, and find out the new meanings. As well as describe about. Hey, Ruchita, how are you? Hi, Sindhu. Fine, thank you. And how about you? I'm fine too. It's been a long time.
Identity is extremely important. There is a scientific evidence to prove that your sense of identity is extremely crucial to your growth as a successful human being in your life. If you accept an identity which is very humiliating, which reminds you of very painful past, I think that identity will not help you to grow. I'm not saying that you should forget your past. I'm not saying that, but that should not be in the bubble in which you must live always. Sweros is an alternative identity. S stands for state, W stands for welfare, Aero, SW and then Aero is Swero. So the idea is your dreams have to be skybound. So that is what we are trying to achieve by changing the identities. Like, we say, I'm a Swero and I aim to be a doctor. I am a Swero, I aim to be a top-notch engineer. I am a Swero, I aim to be a top bureaucrat of this country. I'm a Swero, I want to be a very good actor or, a musician in this world. So these are the positive images that are associated with the identity. Just to give an example to you, in 2012, in our institution, we used to produce about 6 doctors per year. But because of our, this self-liberating ideology of Sveroism, we have, this year, we have produced about 189 doctors. This is phenomenal for any poorest of the poor people. You know how difficult it is to get into medical colleges in this country. So, but today, because of this ideology, the students have been able to achieve this, feat. Pujita has been a farm laborer, and her parents themselves are agricultural laborers. And then this girl used to sell vegetables, but thanks to the residential education institutions, she came to the Gauli Doddi campus, and then she toiled very hard for 1 year, despite many problems. And today, I'm so happy to share with you that she has joined one of the prestigious medical colleges in the state of Telangana, Usmania Medical College, and then in future, she hopes to be a gynecologist. So this is the journey our children are hoping for. Similarly, the Mount Everest expedition. Mount Everest expedition, we are very fortunate enough to place the youngest ever female in the history of this world on the peak of Mount Everest. How did this happen? It's all because of an ideology that helps you to liberate yourself. We brought a lot of extracurricular activities and most of them got institutionalized now. So for example, music. Similarly, the games. We have so many coaching academy. We have boxing academy, we have wrestling academy, we have handball academy. So we have, kabaddi, the traditional Indian sport. We have golf. We have introduced the golf also. Like golf is generally played by so-called rich people, but today even poorest of the poor people also are being trained in golf in our schools. Wow. So our intention has been to give all 360 degrees, type of opportunities to the students, so that whoever is interested in whatever activity, they can go and then do it. Break the barriers, break the fence, at least mentally, because poor people have been programmed to be victims, programmed to be subjugated, programmed to be on the margins, always, programmed to feel inferior. We wanted to change on that. There are certain games which are exclusive to rich people. There are certain languages which are exclusive to middle class and upper middle class in this country. To put it in one word, the sole aim of introducing all these co-curricular activities is to break the stereotypes which are recklessly imposed on these people.
Their stereotypes Dr. Kumar knows all too well. Born a Dalit, his grandparents were labourers and access to the village well was restricted. Dr. Kumar credits his parents' belief in the power of education with helping him realise his aspirations. He went on to join the Indian Police Service, attended Harvard University, and then began pursuing educational reforms back home.
I attribute whatever I am today, it's to my mother primarily. They educated me in the village, although there were no good schools. So then I stayed in social welfare hostels, the hostels which are managed by government for the poorest of the poor kids. I passed with reasonably good grades. Then I went to university and then I faced worst form of discrimination in the universities. Like there were, in those days I'm talking about, so the bathrooms and the toilets were exclusively meant for scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. We used to fight discrimination on one hand and then again, try to excel in academics, day in and day out. So that's how I came to education, because I deeply believe that education is the only important weapon that can really, place the poorest of the poor people from a very victimhood orbit to a prosperous orbit. I think in future, this is going to be a game changer for the marginalized in this country.
If you look at a thermal image of a city and then compare that to a map of vegetation, you'll find that where there's greenery, the temperature is lower. That's because things like asphalt, concrete, and shingled roofs absorb more heat from the sun than trees. This is the urban heat island effect, and it accounts for higher temperatures in cities, often by several degrees compared with their surroundings. It's becoming a huge risk to human health as growing urban populations exacerbate the heating effects of climate change. Heat waves kill more people than any other extreme weather event, more than tornadoes, hurricanes, and even floods. That's why urban heat island mitigation strategies are being studied in Singapore by a group of researchers. The government-backed project called Cooling Singapore is now in the process of combining everything they've learned to create a digital tool that can help cities all over the world, starting with Singapore. In Singapore, close to the equator, temperatures regularly rise above 32 degrees Celsius or 90 degrees Fahrenheit. And the city structures only make it worse.
And that is also the case for Singapore, which is basically a concrete jungle, more urbanized, more developed city. And even in Singapore, what you have is a situation whereby there's a temperature difference of 7 degrees Celsius between the more urbanized and the more rural areas.
The government has taken drastic steps to keep temperatures down. This is Gardens by the Bay, an award-winning park, and inside this greenhouse is a pleasant 24 degrees. That's because the dome, along with 24 nearby towers full of thousands of people, is chilled by what's probably the world's largest underground district cooling system. It uses a large central plant that cools water and then pipes it into banks, residential towers, an exhibition centre, shopping malls, and the city's iconic Marina Bay Sands hotel and casino complex.
So one of the biggest perks of using this system for the buildings is that they can save 40% in terms of electricity usage compared to your traditional air conditioners.
And with Singapore relying on natural gas for most of its power, this new system means emission savings equivalent to removing 10,000 cars from the city's roads. That has big implications for the rest of the world. If things stay as they are, more than a third of the world's electricity could end up being used to cool buildings and vehicles by 2050.
As the world gets hotter, gets warmer, there is a greater need for air conditioning and as well as refrigerators, for instance. And the more people are buying these household appliances, the more energy usage they use, and they release heat more, and that then exacerbates climate change.
It's a vicious circle. And so since 2017, researchers at Cooling Singapore have been identifying design solutions that reduce our need for so much cool air in the first place.
One thing many cities have in common, and that's the importance of vegetation. That's a very important measure to mitigate the urban heat because of the shading effect, of course, and the psychological effects of the vegetation, and also because of the possible evaporative cooling effect of the vegetation. Vegetation can be, of course, on the ground floor in form of trees and shrubs, and you can walk under them. This is the so-called canopy layer that the vegetation forms above us. But vegetation can also go up the facades of buildings, and it can go to the roof of the buildings.
Luckily, Singapore has been striving for the Garden City feel for quite some time. It was a vision initially introduced by then Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew in 1967 to make life more pleasant for people. And today, Singapore is one of the world's greenest cities in terms of urban vegetation. Kampung Admiralty, a community centre that contains health facilities and social spaces, now provides more green space than the plot of land it was originally built on. It's topped by a roofscape of staggered terraces covered in local plants, which functions as a community park. And a village green in the centre that contains farm plots for residents to tend to. Park Royal on Pickering was designed as a hotel in a garden that doubled the green growing potential of its site. There's now 15,000 metres of sky gardens, reflecting pools, waterfalls, planted terraces and green walls. And the government has big plans as well.
Singapore actually has a plan to plant 1 million trees and add more green spaces over the next 10 years. It is actually a mix of wanting to reduce the urban heat island effect, but on the other hand is also to get the people to be more connected to nature.
But it's not enough. The city-state has still been warming twice as quickly as the world average over the past 6 decades. That's why Cooling Singapore has developed a catalogue of other potential heat mitigation measures.
When you try to mitigate the urban heat island effect in a city or in any building, in a village as well, the first place to start is by shading of the windows. You have to keep areas clear so that the wind can move through it. Water of a certain depth can act as a very good thermal buffer. If you have to construct heavy buildings such as high-rises, at least you can make the surface, the facade, less heavy, and you can protect it from direct sun penetration. We have to make sure that no combustion engines will be in the city in the middle, in the medium to long-term range. So ideally, the electricity production is outside of the city, and you bring just the clean electricity into the city. You can at least minimize the use of energy in the city, and you can start to slowly convert the roofs, the facades of the city into production areas for renewable energy. In Singapore, unfortunately, this is a limited option, but in the long run, it could produce up to 20-25% of the energy, of the electricity needed in Singapore, if all the roofs and the areas in the buildings, on the facades would be used to do that.
With so many different ideas, Cooling Singapore is also designing a virtual model of the city to test them out. It's called a Digital Urban Climate Twin, or DUCT, that will calculate how each element of the city's design will impact the urban heat island effect.
That means we model not only the geometry of the buildings digitally, but also we model the transportation, the insulation, the temperature, the radiation coming from the sun, the weather, the local climate, the even very, very microclimate of the city, the water, the movement of people in the city. We can invent scenarios, we can design scenarios, test them before we actually build them, and if they test very well and we are sure that they will function, then we can start to build them and put them into reality.
Singapore will be using this new tool to figure out which actions it should take next. And the model can be applied to any city, whether it needs to keep heat out or keep heat in, which will ultimately save energy, slow climate change, and improve our quality of life.
So this is something that Singapore will be able to export, maybe even together with its city development systems that it already has. Singapore is one of the very few cities in the world that really combine this scientific approach with a very well-established urban redesign and urban design approach. Through its agencies and the combination of its agencies, it has achieved a lot in the past. If it keeps following the scientific path and the combination with the other knowledge in the city already, we think that it will be a very comfortable and very livable city in the future, even more than today.
Times are tough. Jobs are scarce. It's risky to be outside and around others. Seems like there's very few ways to make extra money during a pandemic. So I guess I'll just hunker down and binge social media until this all blows over. Wait, don't these people make money? How do these people make money? Streamers, YouTubers, Twitch stars. How do they make money? Is it a lot? Is it a lot of work? I know, I gotta ask somebody in the biz, and I got just the guy. Austin John Plays.
This is your full-time job now, right?
As of November of last year, yes. This was always just kind of like a side thing. Like any money that I made from doing my videos and whatever else, I never touched that because I didn't really think of that as being like real money. And then it started coming in more and more. And then it was like I hit my first day that I broke $1,000 and I was like, this is actually going to be money.
How did the YouTube channel come to be?
When the game Pokemon Sun and Moon came out for the 3DS, there was like things that I learned about the game, and then I wanted to just share that information with people. And at the time, I didn't have any way to capture a screen or anything, so I found like generic footage, and I kind of put it all together with so much editing. And that video got 6 views. And then 2 days later, I made another one. And that one got 12 views. And then I just started pumping out more and more content, and people were like, this guy knows what he's talking about. It really just started building on top of itself. And then it was like, my channel really focuses on tips and tricks. So I play a straight 18 hours and I'll finish the game or get to about the 40-hour mark. And then I'll make my first video. While I'm going through, I have a giant notepad and just scribbles everywhere. And I make these notes of like the things that stumped me, so I know the things that may stump other people.
What do you need to think about if you're building your YouTube channel?
1, you need to do something that you're passionate about. Not that you like, not that you think you're gonna make money on, something you're passionate about. The other thing is something that other people are passionate about. It holds a special place to them. And third is, it needs to be something that people are gonna seek out information on. In order to enter into the marketplace, you either need to be better than everyone else, you either need to be faster than everyone else, or you need to be more accessible than everyone else. And you can't be more accessible because it's already on the platform. Granted, if you understand how the algorithm works, which is very similar to Google Analytics, then yeah, you can have a little bit of a head start. But if you're not doing it faster, and if you're not doing it better than everyone else, then why should anyone watch your channel? So my income as a YouTuber kind of breaks down to 3 different ways. 1, which is the bulk of it, which is ad revenue. Whenever you go and you watch a video and then there's an ad and then you wait 5 seconds and you hit the bottom right corner and then you go on to the next video, or a non-skippable ad, or the video starts immediately, you get the little banner ad at the bottom, or if you scroll down from the video, the first thing that shows there is an ad. Those are the 4 different types of ads that can appear on every single YouTube video. And all of them pay a certain amount. It varies on lots of things, like the country of the person who posts it, the country of the person who watches it, the time of year, where you are in the quarter, if there's anything going on with a reduction in ad revenue. Like, great example, COVID-19, companies weren't spending as much on advertising. So because of that, CPM went down. CPM stands for click per thousand. I'm using the Roman numeral for 1,000. And that means that for every 1,000 views, you get a certain amount of money. Now, on low ads, when I first started off, my CPM was 30 cents. So every 1,000 views, I made 30 cents. But then once I signed with an MCN and I started making more quality content and more engaging content, some of my better videos and certain times of the year, I can see CPMs as high as $12 to $14. And there's a big fluctuation between, you know, if I post a video when there's no ads being spent, like January and February, that's the reason a lot of your favorite YouTubers and also TV shows don't post new videos in that time of year because ad rates are down. Why are they going to make content then? Instead, you're recording and you're bulking up for when ad revenue is higher. The second way that a YouTuber makes income is support, crowdfunding, things like that. When I first started off, Patreon was really the only option, but then they started rolling out supporters and members for YouTube channels. So Whenever I have a live stream, you can click a button and then you can become a member, and then you get special icons next to your name. I believe they're called badges. Or on any video, you can hit the join button, and that helps support the channel. And then the third aspect of that would be merch. And for me, my merch has been somewhat basic. In fact, I'm wearing one of my t-shirts from last year right now. You have to endure the times that your first video gets 6 views, that you posted on Reddit and they say, shut up, and then an auto mod bans you. You have to go through that, because until you go through that and you discover why you're doing it, you're not doing it for other people, you're doing it for yourself. If you're not loving what you do, then it's not worth it.
Huh. So make a channel about something that I'm passionate about. Oh, sweet. I guess I can make the channel about that. Now, how do I grow an audience? How do I get popular?
It's all about diversification, right? You have to have a massive Twitter following. You have to have a massive Instagram following. You have to have a massive YouTube following. Of course, you have to be on Twitch, which is the key platform. But basically, any way you can get in front of your audience, you can engage with your audience, is going to drive those clicks, which ultimately drives the advertiser revenue that you get back from all of these platforms.
It's me and Dan playing video games and talking in a funny manner over them.
They're not just people who are good at games, they're actually people who are good at online engagement, online entertainment, first and foremost.
You have the right to remain stylish. Anything you wear can and will be used against you in the court of fashion.
The streamer is either very, very talented at the game. The best player in the game is generally going to draw a crowd because people like watching people who are very good. On the other hand, they're either very, very good or funny, charismatic, whatever it is on that side.
Oh, no.
You know, it becomes more of a show where they talk about other things outside of the gaming world, and gaming becomes really just a backdrop and an excuse to engage with that audience.
There were those weird, like, Ronald McDonald, like, straight to VHS movies. You remember those?
I'm personable, I'm chatty. I would kind of, you know, when boring things were happening in the game, I would ramble on about, you know, movies I'd watched or books I'd read and, you know, or conversations I'd had and stuff like that. And so I think being personable was a big part of that.
It's not just getting on and playing games. It's getting on and being an entertainer. You are putting on a show.
All right, now let me go ahead and grab the samurai sword that every gym has. Okay, he's dead.
To have a larger audience and to have that audience, I think, stay with you, you have to bring something extra. You know, you have to find your niche. You have to find what works and what connects with the audience and what makes them laugh and what makes them keep coming back.
You gotta make it a little more exciting, all right? Throw in a hanging bishop. Have everybody in suspense for a moment.
I think the real most important thing is to just get used to being on camera. Like in any sort of performance thing, is get used to talking on camera. You know, my first few videos were terrible, but because I sat down and did it for 6 to 8 hours a day, I just got used to talking and I got over that uncomfortable hump.
If you go into Twitch purely with the expectation that you're going to make money, make a job out of it, have all this growth, and it's going to be great, you're probably going to burn out prior to getting to that point because there's very little payoff for a long time, right? Like multiple years generally before you really start to see a payoff. And so, you know, those first few times you're streaming, nobody is there. One person shows up every 30 minutes, says hi, maybe, and leaves, right? Like, it's very discouraging, I think, for a lot of people. And so you have to be there just loving it. You have to love talking to yourself when nobody is around. You have to love just the game that you're playing, all of that stuff, because it takes a while. And I think a majority of people burn out prior to getting to the, like, profitable point of it.
And there you have it. My very own YouTube, Twitch, Discord, and streaming channels all ready to go live. It's a veritable social media ecosystem just on the verge of thriving. So, don't forget to smash like and subscribe, and visit my Patreon for perks. Also, go to my merch page. And one last thing, stay cool, my friends.
This is live stream shopping, one of the hottest trends in China. Every night, tens of millions of people watch live shows hosted by influencers like Via and buy the products they recommend. On e-commerce and social apps like Taobao and Douyin, the sister app of TikTok.
我觉得已经改变了大家的购物的方式。其实各种各样的产品，哪怕你不买，你也可以来看。当然，你看了你就有可能会买。
It's not about, only shopping. It's about the experience. It's about having fun. You got to see 3D. You got to see in some kind of action. It's almost like a theater act.
The internet craze has taken over China. By the end of 2020, the country had almost 400 million live stream shopping users. China's live stream e-commerce market has also grown dramatically, with an estimated value of $161 billion in 2020. It's becoming popular outside China as well. So, is live streaming the future of shopping? Live streaming is not a new thing. In China, it started in 2015 with the rollout of 4G. And it was first used for entertainment and socializing. Many live streamers performed for their followers or chatted to them, making money by receiving virtual currency and gifts. In the West, live streaming is mainly the domain of avid gamers. In China, it's broken into e-commerce.
China actually has a very big e-commerce empire, so it uses these super apps, what we call that you have payment, you have search of information, you have recommendation system, and you have huge amount of goods available on the platform, and as well as a lot of consumers. So with this advantage, they merge these features of live streaming to make the influencers actually sell goods.
Here is a perfect choice: nice neutrals, beautiful print, nothing overwhelming, and the warmth and comfort of flannel. This is item.
Traditional TV shopping involves a one-way direction, whereby a host introduces a product, demonstrates certain things, and say, call this number or something. But live stream shopping is live. That in itself is a very, very big difference. It causes different psychology. And live stream shopping is a very entertaining way of actually engaging someone else.
When you shop, actually, this live streaming video will continue. It will minimize into a corner, and you can buy the items and pay all on the same app. And after that, the live streaming screen will just enlarge by itself, and the promoter will come back to screen. So it's very convenient.
Taobao, one of China's biggest e-commerce platforms owned by tech giant Alibaba, added a live streaming function in early 2016. In the following years, other e-commerce and social platforms like JD and Douyin also integrated this feature.
开头的时候还是有很多的挑战的，对画面的这个流畅，然后是否能够很真实的去还原商品，它其实在这个上面是有很高的这个门槛跟技术的这个卡口在的。不管是我们的这个用户的接受度，还是商家的这个上手的这个难度都很高。但是这几年下来，基本上难点在不断被突破的。
Over $70 billion worth of goods was sold via live stream on Taobao in the year through March 2021. Latest surveys show that over 60% of live stream users in China were watching shopping shows, and over 65% of them shopped at least once via live stream. In 2020, live stream shopping got a huge boost during the pandemic, when millions of people were in lockdown and many retailers were pushed online.
People, during the lockdown, felt like there's a need for more social interactions. This live platform creates an interesting kind of environment that gives people the sense that I'm actually interacting with you. And then live stream shopping brings in a lot more variety of things that people could buy and satisfy, the sense of like losing control, especially during the pandemic.
At the heart of this craze are the top influencers who have tens of millions of followers and sell products worth millions of dollars every night. They often use their star power to get bargains from retailers, which in turn boosts their own sales and influence.
So if you think about China's live streaming, you have to know the king and queen of the influencers. The queen of live streaming, Via, she is actually having the biggest viewership and the biggest sales volume for a long time on Taobao platform. She can sell everything from like Gucci sunglasses, lipsticks, homes and cars. One time she offered her followers to go on a Tesla ride with her, and she even, for once, sold a rocket launch in her live streaming room for 40 million yuan. The king will be Li Jiaqi, more widely known as Lipstick's brother. He used to be a cosmetic sales before he turned into live streaming e-commerce, and he knows a lot about the cosmetics. So he's the one that will actually put the lipsticks on himself when he's on the show.
Top live streamers like Via and Li Jiaqi have become celebrities in China and can earn millions of dollars a year. Although not everyone can be as popular, mid-ranking live streamers like Tiffany still earn a good income through sales commissions.
如果说单从收入方面来讲的话，那主播的收入是比普通的工作要高很多。但是呢，主播这个工作时刻对身体，包括对精神都有很大的一个考验的。就是每天需要集中精力，然后长达5-6个小时，这种状态是很累的。而且这5-6个小时的话，你是脑子是不停的，然后嘴巴是不停的，然后手也是不停的，眼睛也是不停的。像我们做主播，不是说单一的只做直播一件事情，然后还会有选品的一些工作，然后还会有一些其他的事情排在里面，其实是没有个人生活的。那我觉得增强粉丝影响力的话，不是说某一件事情。可能今天做了什么事情你就增大了影响力，而是每天不断的内容的输出，粉丝不断的可能对你的了解，慢慢的信任你。
没有芝麻酱的味道，如果吃不习惯的话就慎买。
A lot of successful live streamers are generally very good at communication. They're very good at articulating very simply what a product does, what a product doesn't do. In order for them to sell, they need to be trustworthy and appear trustworthy, and they need to, show in some ways that they're authentic, right? So for Via and Li Jiaqi, they are able to articulate that quite a bit through their body language, through what they say. For example, Li Jiaqi will also sometimes say bad things about certain products because to him that's his honest opinion, and sometimes people want to hear that. And so they seem very credible, they seem very trustworthy, and don't forget, they're also very entertaining and very interesting. If you're familiar with Li Jiaqi, he won a Guinness record for like the most lipstick applications to models in like 30 seconds. So if you're able to create a lot of buzz with interesting things that you do, people who may not want to buy lipsticks will also stream in just to watch what he does. And then from there, you might get hooked.
这就是一般女生出门的时候涂的口红的颜色。
Live streamers also use sales techniques such as limited time or supply. This sense of scarcity can often encourage viewers to buy.
The platform in itself creates and enhances some of these things because you see it live. Something we call social proof has taken over, meaning that, hey, other people are interested, other people are joining in, other people want the same product. And they add it in the chat and they ask questions and they say, oh, I want this too. What happens then? It makes the whole product even more scarce.
But it's not just influencers. Local farmers, luxury brands, even mutual funds have also started their own live stream shows.
Working with very top-tier live streamers can be risky. It's not necessary that the benefits will end up with the brand. So we see company executives opening their own shows, and we see like P&G have their own sales room which runs shows every day as well. We also have like local governors in like small towns to sell their agricultural products. So the live streaming is definitely transformed the way product owners can think about how to reach their consumers, and it enables a lot of players to actually sell.
Live stream shopping is going global. Merchants in Southeast Asia have embraced this trend. And in the West, Amazon has upgraded its live streaming function, adding interactive features like chat rooms. Companies, including Google and Facebook, are also developing and investing in technologies to integrate video and e-commerce.
直播电商它其实已经开始成为主流，它未来的发展空间跟潜力都是巨大的。接下来大家会越来越依赖这种购物方式，会变成一个比较日常化、比较规范化的这么一个趋势。
If you look at the numbers alone, their numbers alone, Lijiaxi's numbers or Via's numbers, you know that they can sell and you know that they can generate revenue. Are they able to sustain it over a long period of time? It depends on how innovative they are at changing some of the things that they do.
But you can't expect consumers one day turn into virtual shopping for good. There will be the nature of us that crave to go into the store, to touch the goods and actually wear it and see how it looks like and walk around in that with our friends. And those things wouldn't be replaceable with live streaming.
You could imagine that the oceans are actually the largest battery. We're storing huge amounts of energy in the oceans. The wave motion can be very deep. It can extend down several hundred meters. And once it gets to the near shore, from about 50 meters, the whole water column is moving backwards and forwards.
As we search for ways to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels, some are looking to a largely untapped potential source of renewable energy. In theory, waves off the coast of the United States alone could generate over 2 trillion kilowatt hours of electricity a year, enough to power more than half of the country.
Waves intensify and subside not as quickly as the wind, and that means that it can produce a smoother power generation curve. One of the potential advantages of wave energy is that it could act as a complementary source of power compared to other renewables on the grid if it were to be scaled up to commercial scale.
For decades, engineers have been trying to convert wave energy into electricity, but a host of technological and financial challenges have complicated their efforts.
In the years from around 2006 to 2015, there were a spate of bankruptcies in the sector, and this was largely because of a lack of kind of continuous proven projects out at sea with reliable electricity generation.
Since then, companies have been trying to develop the technologies at a steadier pace and with a smaller cash burn. But the same questions remain. Can companies develop devices and technologies that actually work? Is wave energy just a novelty or something that can become a major renewable energy source?
The sea is a very challenging environment within which to operate a power project. So seawater is corrosive and conditions are very rough. So this means that power projects don't have a very long lifetime, and it increases operating and maintenance costs.
Partly because of that, many early wave energy projects hit rough waters, such as the Palamas Wave Energy Converter in Portugal and the Isla Limpet project in Scotland. But that hasn't stopped others from trying.
Companies are focused on testing projects out at sea, proving their durability, trying to raise capital and bring down cost. The sector hasn't really converged around one single technology design, and companies are kind of undecided about which design works best.
Finland-based AW Energy is a veteran in the sector. The first proof of concept of the company's device was made in the 90s after diver Rauno Koivusaari observed the strong back-and-forth movement of a hatch cover in a shipwreck in the Baltic Sea.
The waves are generated far from the coastline, so the wind blows on the surface of the water, causing the water particles to rotate, and that rotation extends deep down below the surface, and the waves can be very long. They can be several hundred meters long. And as they come into the near shore, this rotational energy turns into an elliptical energy, and eventually backwards and forwards, as you probably noticed if you've been swimming on the seashore in large waves, you're pulled in and out. That's the energy that we're extracting. There's a sweet spot where we deploy, so around 10 to 15 meters of water depth. That's where there's still strong wave energy coming in.
After years of research, prototyping and testing, the company has deployed Wave Roller, a 350 kilowatt device in the waters off Portugal. Wave Roller has an 18-meter wide and 10-meter high steel panel fixed to the seabed via a floatable foundation. The panel moves back and forth with the waves, capturing the energy.
It's submerged in the depth of 15 meters, so it's protected from the extreme waves. We generate electricity by capturing the movement with hydraulic circuitry in a machine room underneath the surface. That hydraulic energy we turn to electricity with hydraulic accumulators and hydraulic motors, and also a generator.
The Wave Roller has survived large waves at sea for over a year and delivered electricity via an underwater cable to the grid in Portugal. Meanwhile, the company has won a €2.5 million grant to work on an upgraded version of the Wave Roller, aiming to increase the electricity generation capacity to 1 megawatt. The upscaled device would have a bigger panel, 2 power takeoff units, and improved software to control the energy production.
We have taken into use a wave prediction algorithm that kind of tells us what kind of waves are coming into our device. That gives us few seconds to prepare for capturing more energy, and the difference in that is significant.
Our future plans are to deliver technology around the world. So I'm hoping we can be working on delivering technology to projects in Asia and also in the American continent as well.
Meanwhile, Israeli company Eco Wave Power is taking a different approach to capturing the power of the ocean. For the company's founder, Inna Braverman, developing new sources of renewable energy is a personal mission.
I was born in Ukraine in 1986, and 2 weeks after I was born, the Chernobyl nuclear reactor exploded, causing the largest in history nuclear disaster. I was one of the babies that got hurt from the negative effects of such explosion. I had a respiratory arrest and a clinical death. Luckily, my mother, a nurse, approached my crib on time and gave me a mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, which saved my life. I got a second chance in life and decided to do something good with it.
Growing up, Inna wanted to be a politician to positively change the world. After working as a translator at a renewable energy company, she decided to change paths.
Solar and wind energy were fully commercialized. There were a lot of amazing technologies implemented everywhere. I saw that wave energy, although it's an immense source of electricity, the biggest companies in the world are trying to develop wave energy with no success. And there was kind of a race going on in the world of who is the company that is going to develop a viable wave energy solution first.
In 2011, the then 24-year-old Inna co-founded EcoWave Power. Instead of installing devices offshore, the company's devices are attached to existing breakwaters, jetties, and piers.
Our technology is very cost efficient, especially in comparison to the offshore technologies, because we don't need any ships, divers, underwater mooring or cables. We install on existing man-made structures, and all our expensive equipment, the generator, the hydraulic conversion unit, the automation, is located on land just like a regular power station.
This is the EcoWave Power conversion unit that has been operating in Jaffa Port since 2014 until 2020. Here you can see how the technology works. Basically, the floaters are going up and down and pushing the hydro cylinders, which transmit biodegradable fluid into land-located accumulators. A pressure is being built. The higher the waves, the higher the pressure, which is used to turn the hydro motor, which is turning the generators. The whole system is controlled by a smart automation system, which you can see right here. And in case of upcoming storms, the system automatically raises the floater above the water level and keeps them in the upward position until the storm passes.
The company has been operating a 100-kilowatt grid-connected device in Gibraltar since 2016, which is enough to power 100 households. Currently, Inna and her team are working on another 100-kilowatt project at the port of Jaffa in Tel Aviv.
The project will be also the first time in the history of Israel that wave energy will officially connect to the electrical grid. And our goal going forward is to expand it to all suitable breakwaters in the city of Tel Aviv and to supply a significant part of the city's electricity needs.
Today, engineers and entrepreneurs are still trying to crack wave energy. Globally, only a few hundred kilowatts of wave energy are deployed, compared with gigawatts of offshore wind. But the field has come a long way in recent years, and with the right engineering solutions, this new power source could eventually become competitive with more mature renewables like solar and wind.
I would have a lot more confidence in the success of wave energy companies today as opposed to like 20 years ago. But in the next few years, or maybe the next couple of decades, it will be more likely to be used in remote locations like islands that are otherwise dependent on expensive diesel power, or out at sea on gas decommissioning rigs, or for powering underwater autonomous vehicles.
So definitely, wave energy can compete with other renewable energy sources, but I personally believe that this is not a competition. In order to have a 100% renewable energy friendly world, we need all renewable energy sources to work together.
people from? Where are all these people from?
So can you please tell me? I'm not going to... please wait.
You know, I've covered a lot of companies. I've covered a lot of Machiavellian companies where, you know, people play rough. I don't think I've ever seen anything on the scale of Nissan.
He is making you, but you act from this side. I mean, it's corrupt. The system is...
One of the most dramatic elements was Ravinder Passi's home being raided by court officials in Yokohama.
You scared my wife. You scared my children. I worked in Nissan for 16 years.
So Rav Passi's journey into the darkest recesses of the Japanese corporate world started when he was the general counsel, the highest corporate lawyer position in the company.
In the past few minutes, Nissan has revealed that its chairman has been arrested after allegations of serious misconduct.
He was tasked with investigating Carlos Ghosn. And he was told, conduct an internal investigation and get to the heart of the matter. And then along the way, he started to notice serious conflicts of interest.
He is one of the few people who knows an extreme amount of detail regarding the alleged crimes by Carlos Ghosn. And he's now ready to tell his own story on the record about some of the events that happened.
My name is Ravinder Passi. I'm the former Global General Counsel of Nissan Motor Co. Limited. And you could say, yes, I had a front row seat in terms of what was going on.
When Carlos Ghosn saved Nissan years ago, he was depicted in Japanese comic books as this hero, and now maybe we'll see comic books where he's the villain.
In corporate Japan, Nissan was quite an unusual company. It was led for 2 decades by a non-Japanese executive.
Well, Carlos Ghosn was a hero in the Japanese business world. If you had a global business celebrity in Japan and worldwide, it was definitely Carlos Ghosn.
In a country with few foreigners at the top, he stood out. But over the years, he saved Nissan from bankruptcy, allied with Renault and Mitsubishi, and turned the alliance into one of the most competitive in the world.
Yet as the years went on, you know, I think his ambitions changed a little bit. He started thinking about legacy plays, and one of them was to really tighten the alliance between Renault and Japan. And unbeknownst to him, there was a contingent of senior Nissan executives that were really felt threatened by that move. They really thought that they would lose complete control of the car company, and even in the government, there was probably a little bit of anxiety about a national champion in the auto industry falling under full-blown foreign control.
Carlos Ghosn was an auto industry leader, respected by many in Japan. Now he's in jail.
The arrest of Carlos Ghosn came completely out of the blue. This was in November of 2018. He was coming to Japan on Nissan's corporate jet for a regular executive meeting, and he was met on the tarmac by Japanese authorities who whisked him away to a jail and charged him with financial misconduct crimes.
So what happened was that a power struggle ensued inside the company, and somewhere along the way, it was criminalized. By that I mean that there were allegations leveled at Carlos Ghosn about the way he reported his pay to Japanese authorities, the way he handled money inside the company, that in other contexts might have been a board action, might have been handled internally. A number of executives at Nissan decided to take this difference and take it over to the Tokyo prosecutor's office, and that unleashed a chain of events that would shake the entire auto industry.
So after Carlos Ghosn was arrested, Nissan launched an internal investigation into the events that led up to his arrest.
So Rav Passi was tasked with investigating Carlos Ghosn, and he was told, get to the heart of the matter, find out what Carlos Ghosn did wrong and bring it to our shareholders.
It's really complicated because you had various things coming out of the weeds. 2018, the investigation has started, and we become aware of matters in terms of conflicts, actions by certain individuals that cause some concern because things might not quite be what they seem.
So in our story, we really took a close look at Harinada and his role in Carlos Ghosn's downfall.
Harinada is one of the most fascinating figures inside Nissan. He's also a lawyer. He's originally Malaysian. Hello, Mr. Hadi. And he had a meteoric rise through the company and became very, very close to Carlos Ghosn and other top figures. He had a front row seat at all the major strategic deliberations at the company. And when he discovered that Carlos Ghosn, as his final legacy play, was going to tighten the relationship between Renault and Nissan, he made a decision to go against Carlos Ghosn. And he became one of the key figures that decided that Carlos Ghosn had to go.
Harinada was somebody who actually recruited me into the company, so I have a long-standing relationship with him, or did have a long-standing relationship with him. For many, many years, he was a mentor. I had doubts about the credibility of the process right at the start. Harinada had a plea deal with the Tokyo prosecutors. Now, that suggests he was intrinsically involved in some of the wrongdoing, or the allegations of wrongdoing, and it just didn't smell right, just doesn't sit right.
So there was a basic conflict of interest. In other words, Harinada had to deliver results to Japanese prosecutors to avoid his own criminal liability, and he's accusing and leading the investigation of Carlos Ghosn.
Some of the people who had been involved in the original alleged crimes were also looking into the affairs themselves. Ravinder Passi began pointing out some of these conflict of interest issues. And the reason for that is essentially his concern was for the company. If the company's own investigation into itself was compromised, that could lead to a very weak position in various lawsuits that it was dealing with across the world.
I had discussions with Harry, discussions with the statutory auditors about these conflicts, discussions with HR about some of these conflicts, because at that point, we reported into him. You know, at the time, everything was quite, as you can imagine, it was, we've got to do this, we've got to do that, we've got to move fast. But when you step back and look at some of these things, you just think, my God, what was going on here? Because me, members of my team, were being placed in immediate danger. Your chairman's been arrested, a representative director's been arrested. They both happen to be foreigners. And then now what we need to do, we're being instructed to do, is certain compliance professionals need to go into properties in Brazil, for example, and retrieve evidence. They've got to do it very carefully, because if they don't do it carefully, they're going to get convicted of criminal activities. And likewise, when a team of lawyers were commissioned to go to Lebanon. I mean, one of my immediate concerns was, why are lawyers from Nissan being sent to go to Lebanon to retrieve evidence? These are just lawyers, they're corporate lawyers from Nissan. You had revelations that a number of executives had benefited from share appreciation rights when they shouldn't have. I mean, you know, substantive amounts of money being taken by these guys when they weren't entitled to take them. And you do think, yes, how is this going to look later on? It's going to look quite concerning. So that triggered for me the sort of assessment that, well, I'm going to have to do something, because up until this point, I haven't put down on paper these conflicts and these issues.
So Rav Pasi makes a fateful move. He writes this letter to the board listing every suspicion he has in great detail, backed up by evidence, backed up by memos, of why this internal investigation had serious problems. He sends the letter to the board and it's crickets. He doesn't hear much of anything.
Nothing happened thereafter. Nothing at all. Just like it just gone into a black box.
And he began to suspect that there was a desire, even at the highest level within Nissan, to kind of sweep these conflicts of interest under the rug.
Unfortunately for me, I think, you know, again, with hindsight, people must have thought that this is the nail that's sticking out, and we can't have this. Within 3 days of me submitting that to the board of directors, that letter to the independent board of directors, I was removed from the Gohan Executive Conduct Matters. I was then told that I could not attend board meetings anymore. And up until that point, I had attended every single board meeting. I was then also told that after 8 years of being in Japan, I'd be going back to the UK. It eventually transpired that I'd be the VP of Projects and Transformation, managing a team of 3. So you can imagine what this feels like at this stage. Almost an arbitrary removal from Japan, where I've lived for 8 years, had 3 children there, my family has grown up, and we've been settled there, having a few months earlier been promoted to vice president at a global level, to being almost demoted.
So Pasi was essentially being reassigned to get him as far away from the internal investigation as possible, and also to a certain extent in retaliation to some of the issues that he brought up regarding the internal investigation and Harinada.
What happened to Rav Pasi can be seen as a series of corporate humiliations. I mean, first of all, his immediate responsibilities were taken away from him. Eventually, he lost, you know, the coveted general counsel title. But it didn't stop there. Toward the end of his stay in Japan, Rav and his wife were convinced that they were being followed.
During that period, I'd noticed that whilst driving my car, I'd have other cars following me. First time I noticed this was around mid-March, and I was driving, I can't remember where I was going, but this grey van, small van, just literally started following me. And I noticed that there was somebody in the car taking pictures. And lo and behold, we were absolutely being followed either by people on foot or other individuals, 2 or 3, normally 2 burly men in a car, different cars at different times, following us around. They were following the family as well. And, you know, given I'd seen the Nissan security department behave in a very, very egregious manner with others in terms of following and surveilling, I was very concerned as to what they were doing and who they were giving this information to. Because if they're giving this information to the authorities, you do think, why? What's going on here? I mean, this is just not normal behavior.
And this all culminated in a rather dramatic event in the middle of 2020.
Who are you people?
Where Nissan had hired a legal team and had obtained an unusual court order from the district court in Yokohama
to basically do a search of his home and seizure of his corporate laptop and phone and other documents.
If you don't let us in now, we have to break this key.
So it's a pretty extreme way to treat someone who had spent 16 years at the company.
These people have all come in. We don't really know who they are, apart from the fact that I've been shown a badge that says the Yokohama court. And they're here to recover a laptop and a mobile phone. It was even more weird because I'd highlighted to the directors that certain Nissan executives were trying to recover this laptop and this phone whilst I was still in Japan. And I was very concerned because it had evidence on there that related to misconduct matters and other forms of inappropriate conduct. It was just another form of intimidation, another form of harassment, forcing me almost to leave the company and the country. Because once they'd retained and obtained these items, we were still followed, which, again, I just couldn't understand. What is the point of doing that? This isn't a car company. This is not the KGB.
I think it's fair to say that Rob Posse didn't have full battlefield awareness of all the intrigue going on at Nissan. I mean, Harinata is interesting because he's both charismatic and charming, and one of the most brutal corporate infighters one could ever run across.
This is a confidential company email, right? You should not have this.
If he had fallen into line, he would probably still have his job at Nissan, be paid very well, and continued his work.
A career that he spent 16 years building at Nissan is irretrievably broken. It's been smashed to smithereens. He and his family paid a huge price, certainly. But in terms of being able to sleep at night, I think, he's come out ahead.
I highlighted issues to the highest levels of the company so that they could be dealt with appropriately by those in charge. There was no response to those, and there was retaliation against me. What's really profound, like absolutely profound, is that none of your colleagues, I mean people who you have known for years, forget it.
Yeah.
You're on your own.
Yeah.
And you got to be ready for that. You've got to be ready for that. If you take it on anyway.
This is the awful truth. There's always someone in the family that's pushing it.
This lady does not deserve to be taken advantage of, especially at your age with your own grandchild.
Yeah.
My grandma is having to sue them. I'm testifying against them. Nobody's talking. They're one floor below right now. I get afraid to go on the elevator. It's sad that it had to devolve to this.
It's like a soap opera to me.
It's a very sad thing.
It's a family feud. A family feud.
Here's a family that, on paper, you would think has the wealth that so many people seek, yet at the end of the day, it seemed to sort of rip everybody apart. My name's Tom Schoenberg. I'm a senior reporter here at Bloomberg News, cover financial enforcement. I was approached by someone close to the Schottenstein family and asked whether or not I would be interested in writing about Beverly Schottenstein and this case that she had against JP Morgan. And it was immediately clear that there was a great story here to be told. So I started just, assembling all sorts of documents that the family made available to me. That included a diary that Beverly had begun writing when she started having suspicions about what was actually going on with her money. Beverly obtained her wealth from the Schottenstein kind of retail empire that has at times included Big Lots, Value City, American Eagle Outfitters, DSW Shoes. Beverly's husband died, and at which point they sold off their portion of the company, bringing them an enormous amount of wealth at around 1990. Estimates of her wealth were around $90 million. She, for many years, had that pool of money being managed by outside advisors. Her grandsons in the late 2000s had both graduated and were becoming financial advisors. She gave them a little bit to work with, and over time, her grandson, Evan, became the trustee of her entire estate. Managing sort of family money is not a conflict. In fact, some ways in wealth management, it's kind of how you get your start. It's kind of the seed that you need to sort of get going in the business. But Beverly started having suspicions that something was wrong probably in around 2016.
Well, there were suspicious things, but taken separately without everyone talking about their own experiences, it was hard to really put it together.
She had written a check to her caretaker, Dawn, that bounced. So she went down to her local Chase branch to sort of find out what was going on. She wasn't getting paper statements in the mail, so she asked them to print out a number of her statements having to do with her checking account and her credit card account.
So we went to the bank and asked for the statements. And she got a whole year and going through all of them, page by page by page.
And it was there she saw all sorts of charges that she said she didn't authorize or didn't know about.
I was becoming very, very suspicious. I was starting to look in the money part, and that's what bothered me more when I saw that money was going. And I was not a big spender.
Around the same time, Dawn, she starts noticing Beverly's son, who lived in the condominium below her, came up with Evan with a shredder and started grabbing papers in her office area, including some with JP Morgan letterhead, and just started sitting at the kitchen table, just shredding documents over and over.
Yeah, they came in one morning.
They used to do it in the back.
Through the back door, and they brought the shredder inside. And then they went in the drawers in the office and took out all the papers, and they started doing it. I was very suspicious because I know you don't go around and destroying papers.
Beverly said that they had done this many times before.
That's when she said to me, Dawn, I'm going to write my feelings in this black book.
Diary.
And it's a diary, and she started writing. Each day she would write a little at a time.
Around the holidays of 2018, a package had arrived, a FedEx package, and in it were materials about a venture capital fund based out of the Cayman Islands. Dawn and some other family members take a look at this, and they see that Beverly is signed up for this fund to the tune of $5 million over the course of several years.
And that was really the beginning of it. That was sort of the tip of the iceberg when it became obvious that something was going on, that my grandmother really wasn't aware of this fund.
You know, Beverly started to panic. She got really upset and called, JP Morgan's headquarters in New York and asked for Jamie Dimon. She said she was told someone would call her back, but she says that never happened. She wrote a letter to Evan and Avi, and in there she laid out a number of things that were concerning her: unauthorized trading, the checking account. She had about $1 million worth of jewelry in a safe deposit box, and that her son Bobby had the key to that box, and that jewelry had gone missing. All this was kind of packaged in this, 5-page handwritten amendment to a will and trust.
There's such an evolving narrative about why the jewelry was taken. The only truth we really know is that the jewelry is gone. But why it happened, there have been a lot of different stories.
You just don't take your mother's wonderful things and hand it out.
And they emailed that note to JP Morgan to seize all activity on her account.
And it ended up setting off a firestorm after that. As soon as they got this email that there was a cease and desist and that she wanted to send her money and change brokerage firms, they were actually vacationing one floor below downstairs. They're there right now.
The next day, Beverly's in her place. The granddaughter's still in her place visiting. Dawn is there, and up comes Bobby kind of barging through the door. And he's screaming about what was sent to the JP Morgan. They're now investigating them. And he's furious, takes his mother and sort of puts her into a chair, gets pen and paper, and she says physically forced her to write a retraction letter.
They were pushing me around.
It was a scary time. I was really afraid too.
I had to take her to the doctor, and she did an x-ray because she was in so much pain.
The locks had to be changed. The phone number had to be changed. I really thought we were going to have to hire guards to be outside just for protection.
Oh, it was terrible.
Horrible scene.
Beverly brought her case before the Financial Industry Regulatory Authorities, usually known as FINRA. It took several months of hearings. She sees all sorts of transactions that's going on, hundreds of them that she claims that she never knew about, never authorized, but yet were logged in JP Morgan's files as having been direct requests from her. That included the sale of a large amount of Apple stock worth several $1 million, as well as all her stock in Big Lots. Over the course of their time with JP Morgan, Evan and Avi were making all sorts of trading on her account that was generating millions of dollars in commissions for themselves and the bank, yet she was not sort of getting any of the type of gains that you would expect sort of an $80 million account in a bullish market to be able to get. They issued a ruling entirely in her favor, finding that her grandsons, as well as JP Morgan, they were liable for violating their fiduciary duty, misrepresenting themselves, and they also found that the bank and her grandson, Evan, were liable for elder abuse. Evan and Avi, they were fired from JP Morgan. They issued an award of about $19 million. I reached out for comment, and JP Morgan emphasized that Evan and Avi were no longer with the firm and that their actions do not represent the sort of values of the bank. I reached out to Evan and Avi, heard back from their lawyer saying that, they disagree with the law and the facts that FINRA kind of used to decide the case against them and are seeing if they can have it withdrawn. Her son, Bobby, wrote her a letter, said his sons weren't criminals, and he also admits to taking her jewelry. And he says he needed it to pay off some bad business debts he had.
They never once came up to say, I'm sorry.
If there had been an apology and some acceptance, and asking for forgiveness. From my grandmother, I don't think we'd be in the position that we are now.
Since the piece came out, we've received dozens of messages from people, many of whom are telling their own sort of personal tales of, kind of financial advisors gone bad, or family members who got control of an estate and abused, those within. Seems that it's really resonated with a lot of people. I keep, hearing a lot of feedback about Beverly and how, a lot of people feel she did the right thing.
You're never too old to stand up for yourself and try to right an injustice. She was adamant that she wanted to stand up for herself, but at the end of the day, they did wrong.
It's a painful life lesson. Beverly taught them that you don't mess with grandma.
On April 20th, oil markets did something they never had before, and they crashed, went into negative territory and closed the day at minus $40. Meanwhile, in a place called Thaden Boyce in Essex, a group of 9 traders, led by a guy called Cuddles, made $660 million over the course of a couple of hours.
The price of oil has collapsed to a record low.
We've never really seen anything like it. WTI this morning down more than 35%.
People maybe wouldn't have been so surprised if the oil price had fallen to zero, but the oil price went to minus 38. It went far lower than anyone had expected. And so lots of people in the market were saying, well, hang on, something else is going on here.
A couple of months later, I started to get wind through a kind of network of sources that a tiny firm in the outskirts of London had made a huge amount of money that day and potentially had some part to play in what happened.
The information we got was that 9 traders at Vega Capital London had made in the region of $660 million in one day. As a group, I think they made as much money in one day as Apple makes from its international sales in one day. I mean, it's an insane sum of money.
Did they pull off a fantastic trade? Did they predict the way the market was moving and get it absolutely right? Or was there something else going on, and had they actually done something that breached market rules in a bid to sort of push the market? And that investigation is ongoing. So Paul Commins is a trader who cut his teeth in the pits in the 80s and 90s. When everyone had a nickname, his was Cuddles. If you can imagine, that was a very sort of cutthroat type of world where people are doing, hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars trades by shouting at each other, giving hand signals, and then sort of scrawling on scraps of paper.
The culture of the trading pits in London was very influenced by the working class guys who became traders there. They weren't like the city bankers that had gone before them. They weren't usually Oxford or Cambridge. They didn't wear Savile Row suits. They were ordinary working guys who happened to have a talent for trading. And a lot of them came from Essex.
I think it was 400 traders in the pits, and Cuddles in his oil and gas pit was described to us as amongst the top 3. In amongst that, was very successful and made very large amounts of money as a young man. But inevitably, mechanization and the arrival of electronic markets was the kind of death knell for the pits. And in 2005, the IPE closed down.
And when the pits shut down, a lot of the traders who worked there lost their jobs or quit or went to work for financial institutions. But Paul Commins decided to start his own trading collective out in Essex.
Some of them are ex-pit guys, cut from the same cloth as him. Lots of them are actually sort of in their 20s, and they're his, drinking buddy's son, or they're his own kids' friends from football. They're young lads, hungry and ambitious, and he brings them into the fold. And fairly shortly, he's got, maybe a dozen or so traders that they're independent, let's be clear, but they're all part of this collective.
Yeah, I'll let Liam deal with Essex.
I am from Essex, so I feel like I'm free to, to get into this.
Sweet, as they say.
If you were to ask someone in Britain how they would imagine a kind of Essex person, they would see someone who's maybe slightly flamboyant, with a sort of Cockney accent, a sort of Guy Ritchie-style accent. Not afraid to splash the cash, but it's probably pretty bright and has done well for themselves.
Don't even make sense, does it?
But, these guys, they drove around very nice Rolls Royces and Bentleys. They went to places like Marbella on holiday.
Thaden Boyce is a very wealthy place. You have to have considerable income to be able to afford to live in that village. It's a really nice place to live, and it's 20 minutes tube ride away from the city.
Earlier in the summer, we have this lead, which is that there's this tiny firm called Vega Capital London, and they were the biggest winners from the biggest oil crash in history. Anyone that covers markets is going to be surprised about that. You're thinking your BPs of the world or your Glencores, but it's this tiny firm.
And one of the big challenges that we had was actually finding out who worked with Vega Capital. It wasn't immediately obvious, and at first we had absolutely no idea. If you go to the Vega Capital website, it says it's under construction. If you do basic online searching, it's very difficult to find anyone who's publicly connected to the company.
So inevitably, we're incredibly curious at this point. Like, who the hell are these people?
The more reporting we did, the more it became clear that this group were connected socially as well as professionally. They went to weddings together, they played golf together, they would go on holiday together. We found out that a number of them were members of the West Ham Supporters Club in London. A few of them started companies together, so you could see all the connections between them and start to see a distinct group emerging.
And it really just was this kind of shock that, this wasn't just like a hedge fund or a firm you'd never heard of. This was actually a group of buddies who all had the same experience on this day and had all made a huge amount of money. So if you're an oil trader, there's a number of different ways you can trade, and probably the most popular is WTI Futures Contracts.
And it's basically a contract that says, I'm going to buy 1,000 barrels of oil from you at this point in the future, or I'm going to sell 1,000 barrels of oil to you at this point in the future.
It's actually just a financial contract to gamble on to predict whether oil is going to go up or down.
On the 20th of April in Essex, there had been signals for a while that this was going to be an exceptional day in oil markets. And we know that some of them arose early and started their trading in the early hours of the morning while it was still dark outside.
Essentially what they were doing is buying contracts that gave them an obligation to buy oil at whatever the price ended up at 2:30 p.m. So they're basically placing a bet that oil was going to fall throughout the day.
But they're simultaneously selling lots of oil as well. And whether they make a profit and how much profit they make is the difference between what they buy the oil for and what they sell the oil for. Now, of course, we now know throughout April 20th, the price dropped and dropped.
So this is going very well for them. They are committed to selling oil at these prices, and the prices are continuing to fall, which means they're going to be able to offset it and buy oil at cheaper at the end of the day. Now, once it gets to kind of 1:30, 2 p.m., that's when things start to get really interesting. Suddenly there's a kind of influx of buyers and sellers, as desperation increases in the market and trading volumes go up. Now at 2:08 p.m. exactly, something bizarre and unprecedented happened, which is that oil passes into negative territory.
And it fell to a record level of minus $38.
We've never seen anything like it, period, in terms of the contraction of the global economy.
That huge gulf between what they were buying the oil for and what they were selling it for enabled them to make more money than they ever thought possible.
So their profit was the difference between minus 37, and all of these positive numbers on every contract they sold.
The price of crude briefly hit minus $37 a barrel. For one group of traders operating from a small office, it was a very, very profitable day.
It's important to remember this had never happened before in the history of oil trading. No one could have predicted it.
I can't think of another example of where you enter a trade and you get paid on both sides. You get paid both to sell and to buy. It's unthinkable.
One thing we know about the Cuddles Trading Arcade is that they were very comfortable taking large risks. And, you have to be clear, this was a large risk.
Yeah, we spoke to oil traders, both people that know these guys and people that don't, and they all say that this is, incredibly risky.
And that's actually what stops a lot of oil traders doing trading like this. They simply aren't willing to stomach the risk. But Cuddles and his friends were.
So when the kind of final calculations came down, the group of the 9 most profitable traders made $660 million or thereabouts between them. I mean, if you can imagine, I think 3 or 4 of them made in excess of 100 million each.
One of the astonishing things about this trade is that 2 of the individuals who made more than $100 million in a single day were in their 20s. One of them was 22 years old. Only a few years earlier, he'd been posting on his social media about doing teenage stuff with his mates in town and going to see girls and rap music. And here he is a few years later making $100 million in a single day's trading. When me and Liam discovered that, we couldn't believe it. We couldn't believe what we were seeing. Oil trading is a zero-sum game. Anytime you're making money as an oil trader, someone else is losing it.
Amongst the biggest losers were the investors in this Chinese fund, Crude Oil Treasure Fund. There were thousands of them, and they lost everything.
Lots of people had put their savings into oil funds. They lost money that day. Big banks and brokers who sort of stand in the middle of trading parties, they lost money that day.
And another interesting thing is that oil-producing countries like Kuwait or Canada, they sell oil as an average of the WTI closing price over the preceding month. So the fact that one of those numbers in that average was minus 37 meant, if you can imagine, countries like Saudi Arabia and Kuwait potentially lost a couple of dollars on every single barrel of oil they sold that month.
Vega Capital's traders made such an extraordinary sum of money that it was inevitable there would be some scrutiny of what they did. But it wasn't just the sums of money they made. In the vital half an hour before the settlement price was set, they were by far the biggest sellers of oil futures in the market, which is an incredible thing to think about when you consider that the other participants in that oil market are going to be the world's biggest banks, oil majors, BP and Shell. And here you have a group of 9 guys in Essex who are having this significant influence over a global market for oil.
I mean, I think you have to assume that if these guys had made $7 million or $10 million, they probably would be celebrating in Essex right now. But the fact that they made closer to $700 million has meant that they are facing understandable scrutiny.
We wrote individually to all the Vega traders who did exceptionally well that day, and we got a letter in response from a law firm representing the group. And the law firm was at pains to point out, number one, they haven't been accused of any wrongdoing, that they all traded independently and separately, and they'd basically all made up their own minds that this was what was going to happen in oil markets based on publicly available knowledge, and decided to execute this trade.
What I love about these stories is there's a real variance of opinion, and some people will look at what happened and think that must be dodgy. They all traded at the end of the day. They all made a huge amount of money while all these people lost. That's shocking. But lots of people say these guys are at acute disadvantage. They're in a market that's inhabited by, huge technology-driven funds and firms and oil giants that have got all the advantages in the world, and when you get a bunch of Essex geezers who essentially beat the market and find a way to make a huge amount of money, they should get a pat on the back, really, because that's the dream. Since this happened, a lot of the guys have stopped trading the monthly settlements that they've done so well at in the past. Several of them have set up new companies. They've essentially gone very quiet. Any kind of social media presence they had has kind of closed down. By all accounts, they're, waiting this out.
It's certainly too early to try and predict how the regulatory investigations are going to pan out. We just don't know. There's a number of potential outcomes for these guys. Potential punishments if there are any findings of manipulation against Vega or anyone affiliated with it might be you could be fined, you could be banned from trading, and in the most extreme cases there have even been criminal prosecutions in the past of people who have been found to have been manipulating the settlement and misconduct related to trade at settlement. There are other outcomes too. One obvious one is going to be that they're able to walk away from this life-changing trade with all the money that they made and celebrated as heroes in the trading community. That they'll go down as legends.
It's very important, given the nature of the climate crisis right now, for the general public to have an understanding of what progress is or is not actually happening. And I think many readers right now, they'll see these hundreds and hundreds of companies making these big, bold climate claims. And they would be forgiven to think that we're well on our way to meeting the emission reduction trajectory we need to be on. And the reality of the matter is we're just not on that trajectory. And a key reason for this sort of disconnect is the use of offsets that aren't doing what they claim to be doing.
We have a massive potential for sort of willful blindness. We can convince ourselves of things regardless of what the facts are. And so that's what tends to happen in these cases. It's not that anybody is setting out to commit climate fraud. They sort of walk themselves into a situation and they convince themselves of one thing, and that allows them to convince themselves of another thing. But at the end of the day, they're doing something that makes no sense at all.
My name is Ben Elgin. I wrote the story about how the billion-dollar market for carbon offsets is setting back the fight against climate change. So one of the challenges in reporting on carbon offsets and trying to figure out what's going on is really finding good experts who have been steeped in this marketplace and are willing to candidly talk about it. One of the best people for this is a fellow named Mark Trexler, and I've been talking to him for more than a decade.
My name is Mark Trexler. I've worked in climate change for the last 30 years. I was actually hired by the World Resources Institute in Washington to work on the first carbon offset project in 1988. In terms of defining a carbon offset, one of the beauties, so to speak, of greenhouse gases, sort of the silver lining of greenhouse gases, when you put up a molecule of CO2 into the atmosphere, it can be anywhere in the planet in 7 days. And therefore, if there's an option to reduce emissions on the other side of the planet, and you can do that very cheaply as compared to doing it in your factory, for example, then why not pay that person, that factory on the other side of the planet to reduce their emissions? Then you are, in a sense, offsetting your emissions, and the atmosphere doesn't really see your emissions anymore.
So carbon offsets have been around for quite some time, and they were actually key with these international climate agreements, such as the Kyoto Protocol, which mandated the wealthiest countries reduce their greenhouse gas emissions.
The treaty was signed on the 11th of December, 1997.
Decided. The business community in general saw carbon offsets as a huge opportunity to comply with whatever policies and measures might be coming down the pike on climate change much more cost effectively.
We've seen a huge surge in companies making big proclamations about how they're going carbon neutral or zeroing out all of their carbon emissions.
We're going to reduce our carbon footprint to net zero.
Unilever is committing to net zero emissions.
We can achieve a net zero emissions world.
We began looking at these corporate claims of dramatically reduced emissions, and we noticed so many of these companies were using carbon offsets to achieve these aims. And as we began to look at the carbon offset projects themselves, what we found is that the environmental benefits claimed by these companies are not actually what they seem to be. And as we sort of saw and spotted a number of these very aggressive carbon offset projects, which appeared to be generating inflated credits or bogus credits, we saw a number of them were associated with the Nature Conservancy. This surprised us. The Nature Conservancy is the world's biggest environmental group. They have about $1 billion a year in revenues, and they've been around for 7 decades. They've preserved about 125 million acres of land, and they've done so many good works over the years, and they've been very strong in terms of working with corporate partners. The Nature Conservancy has taken a different approach, a very pragmatic and pro-business approach. They will not go out and criticize a big polluter, but they're very happy to work with them. Some might say that, well, that's selling out, but others would say, and those at the Nature Conservancy would say, these companies have deep pockets. They can help fund important preservation work, and we have absolutely no problem working with them on this stuff. So companies are very warm, and they've partnered with the Nature Conservancy for many years. And yeah, it definitely lends a sheen of credibility to these projects.
Here's 20 new reasons to visit Disney World this year. 1, 2,
if you look at, for instance, Disney, that's a sprawling company with theme parks and cruise lines that burn up diesel fuel. They have office buildings and television studios that consume electricity. So these companies are trying to make major reductions in their carbon footprints, but it's very difficult to change these fundamental ways their businesses operate. So Disney has been a big buyer of carbon offsets that are orchestrated by the Nature Conservancy. One of the projects that they buy from is called Pennsylvania Ridges. And that's a plot of land. Most of the land is actually about a 3-hour drive outside of Philadelphia. Interestingly, this land, 3,000 of these acres, was actually acquired by the Nature Conservancy in the late 1990s. This land was imminently threatened. There was a pending logging contract on this land. So they do what they've done so well for all of these years, which is they go out, they raise money from local philanthropists, and they go buy this land to protect it from developers and loggers. And at the time, according to an archived version of the Nature Conservancy's website, when they were proudly announcing this deal, they said, these threats have been abated because of this acquisition by the Nature Conservancy. So it's really interesting now, fast forward 2 decades to earlier this year when they put forward this carbon project. And if you look through it, this land is a key part of that carbon project. And what they're now saying is this land is now, once again, imminently threatened. 72% of the trees are going to be cut within 5 years. Now, this is just astounding because this land is owned by the Nature Conservancy. They do not clear-cut land that they've bought through philanthropic donations. So this scenario that they've put forward to get carbon revenues is not really plausible. And what that means is when you have Disney coming in and buying these credits, when it eventually lowers its carbon footprint because of these credits, well, that won't be a credible or truthful claim by Disney. So this is an organization that truly understands the threat of the issue of climate change and is wanting to do its part to address this. However, in this situation, it just appears their drive, which they've had for decades, to increase the amount of revenues that it can use for land preservation work, Nature Conservancy and many others see that the carbon credits as a pot of money that they can tap into to further their own benevolent aims. But unfortunately, what this has resulted in is claims of climate progress that just aren't really happening. So the Nature Conservancy defends vigorously these deals, and they and others will say, look, our projects are just following the rules that these registries set up. So some would also put some of the blame on the registries themselves because they're setting up the rules which allow these vapid projects to get up and sold. So we've reached out to all of the companies we mentioned in this story, including Disney. They didn't want to be interviewed for this story, but they all told us that, look, we have to rely on the experts out there, and those experts, they say, are these carbon registries that have been set up. Most of these Nature Conservancy deals are set up and sold on this exchange. It's called the American Carbon Registry. Now, it's the oldest of these registries that allow voluntary carbon credits to be sold. They've been around since 1996. What these offset registries do is they set up rules, and any carbon offset project has to follow those rules. But there's this tension that's always there. If the rules are too strict, then it's going to be very hard for carbon offset projects to get up and running. So there's this balance going on where the registries want rules that attract projects, but they don't want it to be so strict where it will disincentivize projects from getting listed.
One of the challenges with designing carbon offset systems is that there are normally two people at the table. You have buyers and you have sellers. And to some extent, you have policymakers, but you know, the buyers and the sellers are really the ones with the expertise, with the incentive to really participate hard, make a lot of things happen. And the challenge there is that both of them sort of want the same thing, or they're both happy with the same thing. They're happy with low-cost offsets and a lot of them, because that works for their business model. You end up, though, with nobody really representing the atmosphere, so to speak. Nobody's really representing the climate in those discussions. And so the policies end up biasing the whole system, and you end up in sort of a race to the bottom, and that's what we've seen happen. You know, when it comes specifically to the topic of carbon offsets, you know, I am a fan of carbon offsets in the sense that they can help mitigate climate change. They absolutely can. But, you know, if we're not going to do it correctly in a way that actually does help mitigate climate change, then it's nothing but a distraction. And, you know, after 30 years, you have to start wondering, is it really just a distraction? And that's really unfortunate, but that's where we are. Ultimately, what needs to happen is systemic change. You know, we're sort of nibbling around the edges with some of these different things. We need to change how we produce energy. We need to change how we transport ourselves. We need to change what and how we eat. You know, we need systemic change associated with transitioning to a low-carbon economy. A lot of what we're doing today is not promoting systemic change. It's sort of trying to stick your thumb in the dike to preserve the current system. And at the end of the day, that can't really work.
the Hyperloop. There's a good chance you've heard the name by now.
This is the Hyperloop system. It can take people hundreds of miles in minutes.
The Hyperloop, a series of tubes that would transport people in pods at ultra-high speeds over long distances.
This is a remarkable new form of transportation that can whisk people from city to city in a flash.
29 minutes from New York to D.C., 30 minutes from L.A. to San Francisco.
For years, we've been seeing these futuristic, utopian renderings of some cross between a spaceship and a monorail. But lately, the Hyperloop is becoming much more real.
Yes! It was surreal to be even sitting inside a Hyperloop, and just even more incredible to actually be like riding down a track in something that was nothing more than a crazy idea 6 years before.
Companies all around the world have been developing and testing the technology needed to propel passengers at speeds of over 1,000 kilometers per hour. But for many, speed is only the first step to unlocking the full transformational effects of a new mode of transportation.
Fast is what we just sort of take for granted in the Hyperloop world. It's the network effects that really deliver the benefit. And that opens up a completely different scale of economic opportunity.
We've got planes, trains, automobiles, and boats for getting around Earth. But what if there was a fifth mode? And I have a name for it, which is called the Hyperloop.
The Hyperloop?
Hyperloop, yeah.
In 2013, while riding high on the growing success of Tesla and SpaceX, entrepreneur Elon Musk released a white paper outlining the basic framework of the technology he called Hyperloop. The basic idea goes a little something like this. A tube reduces the air pressure to a near vacuum-like environment. A Hyperloop pod is then suspended in the tube, usually by magnetic levitation. The whole pod can then be propelled forward. Because there's no traditional friction sources like air resistance or rolling friction that would push back against the pod, the Hyperloop is able to move at incredibly high speeds and do so fairly efficiently. Despite its futuristic name, however, the general concept behind Hyperloop is actually pretty old. In fact, New York City's first attempt at an underground public transit system in the 1870s was based on a similar principle. The pneumatic transit system was short-lived, however, only stretching one block and topping out at a rather leisurely 10 miles per hour. While Elon would make some 21st century improvements to this concept and bestow a very 21st century name, he wouldn't end up pursuing the technology itself, instead electing to focus his efforts on something a little bit deeper, literally digging the requisite tunnels via his boring company. It would take another billionaire industrialist who dabbles in spaceflight. No, wait, not that one. Yeah, that's the one. After Richard Branson would make a large investment in the company Hyperloop One, it would be renamed to Virgin Hyperloop.
What we've always been trying to do as a company is show that this technology could work, that it could be made safe, and that ultimately it's something that's happening in the next couple of years, not the next 20 years.
Josh Geigel is the co-founder and CEO of Virgin Hyperloop. In a familiar tech startup story, he's seen the project go from a garage to a large-scale testing facility outside of Las Vegas.
So we started building the first kind of Hyperloop system in 2016. We've done a lot of work, about 500 tests that we've done on that over the last 5 years. And what we realized that we need to do is take that technology, show that it can be commercial, so drive the cost down, improve the efficiency, improve the performance. But the key thing is actually making it approachable and safe for individuals.
In order to do that, Josh, along with Virgin's head of passenger experience, Sarah Lucian, bravely volunteered to take the inaugural ride.
What her and I were realizing is we're the first two people sitting in a Hyperloop. The only type of people that have gone through this environment are in spacesuits, and there we are in just normal clothes because of the system, the safety of what we've designed.
3, 2, 1, launch.
And then once we started going, you felt a bit of acceleration. We accelerated a little bit harder than we would in commercial. It'd be like a sports car. Yes. We got to about 108 miles an hour on that test. And it's a short run. It's about 500 yards or so, and came to a stop.
The The test, lasting only about 20 seconds and covering only a quarter of a mile at just over 100 miles per hour, is a long way away from a true functioning Hyperloop. But as for optics, it's a crucial step for the future of funding.
The number one question we got from investors or from project proponents or just people in general was like, is a Hyperloop safe? And what better way to show something is safe than by actually getting people on it?
But convincing investors and governments that would likely be fronting some of the construction costs for an unproven technology is no easy task. First and foremost is the question of safety.
Most people don't know how an airplane works, but yet they get on an airplane. They get on an airplane because, it's faster than driving, and most importantly, they've probably gotten off of one before, they've seen someone get off of one before. And so what we set out to do was actually show that Hyperloop could be safe with two normal people, not astronauts, not adrenaline junkies or test pilots or anything like that. Two normal people getting on a Hyperloop, and then most importantly, those two people getting off.
But beyond safety concerns, constructing Hyperloops will undoubtedly require a significant capital investment to the estimated tune of around $60 million per kilometer of track. So a track from San Francisco to Los Angeles, for example, is likely to come with a price tag over $10 billion. And before large governments are willing to come in and front those costs, investors who are funding Hyperloop development must accept it as a long-term mixture of technology and infrastructure investing.
Investors that are used to short returns because you're developing apps or something to that effect, those aren't the investors that really get excited about Hyperloop. What you start to see is the people that are looking at platform technologies, right? So this idea that because the smartphone existed, Uber could exist, right? So who are like the Vanderbilts of this century? And that's the part where you're going to get a lot more no's than yeses. But those people that have the ability, the fortitude to stick it out, to see the game-changing platform here, those are the people that we're looking for. And since we've done that passenger test, there has been a lot of interest that's really, this is a lot sooner than I thought.
Envisioning the ripple effects of what Hyperloop could achieve, though, is fairly challenging at this stage of development. It's fast, yes, but for point-to-point travel, traditional maglev trains can move pretty fast as well. And outside of China, South Korea, and Japan, even those haven't seen much adoption elsewhere due to the high costs and questionable profitability. The Shanghai line in China, for example, loses around $100 million every year. Hyperloop companies, however, believe they can offer something different than traditional railway lines.
My name's Alan James, and as far as I know, I'm the only guy on the planet who's written a government-level business case for 300 kmh conventional high-speed rail, 500 kmh maglev, and 1,000 kmh Hyperloop. It's fundamentally about moving people from where they are to where they want to go, when they want to make those journeys, and doing it in much smaller numbers. So pod designs for Hyperloop range from 12 to 28 seats, typically. Why are they small? It's because small enables the network to operate flexibly. And a great example of that is the east-west strategic route across the north of England, from Liverpool to Manchester to Leeds. So to get from Liverpool via Manchester to Leeds by train is just short of 2 hours today. It'll probably take you 2 hours driving as well in average traffic conditions. Net result is those three city regions remain three separate entities: Liverpool, Manchester, Leeds. There's very little commuting traffic between those urban areas. Hyperloop absolutely changes that from the ground up. Liverpool to Manchester is a 5 or 6 minute journey. Manchester to Leeds is also a 5 or 6 minute journey. What that effectively does is create a single supercity economy.
In this vision, the Hyperloop acts a little more like a highway, where pods have fixed destinations and don't need to stop along the way. Meaning you can travel on a Hyperloop network from, say, Liverpool to Leeds, while the pod behind you travels from Liverpool to Manchester. And if that metro Hyperloop network is connected to other networks from the same location, you could travel from Liverpool to Paris or Liverpool to Amsterdam, all without making a single stop.
For passengers, for business, for leisure, that is utterly transformational. For high-value freight and logistics, it's equally transformational. But critically, if you do a Hyperloop network at scale, you begin to deliver massively significant carbon savings too.
A multi-regional Hyperloop network could become a replacement for both short-haul passenger and cargo flights and traditional ground transportation, both of which are significant carbon producers.
One Hyperloop-connected distribution hub, perhaps at an airport that is predominantly used for international air freight, replacing maybe 10, 12, 15 distributed road hubs. It takes a lot of polluting and inefficient truck haulage off the roads. That itself means roads gain extra capacity.
Hyperloops will still need to use electricity to both move pods and maintain the near-vacuum environment in the tube. Proponents of the technology believe that this can be done by using renewable sources, including a combination of solar panels and battery technology that could be used along the Hyperloop itself. But even with all multipliers of time and carbon emission savings that a Hyperloop network may provide, the investment capital required to actually build such a network becomes even more economically and politically daunting.
Committing doesn't mean spending billions on day one. Committing means, how do we phase it?
One company in the Netherlands is working to develop that technology, and perhaps more importantly, the international coalition needed to make the Hyperloop network a reality.
So we are here in Europe's first full-scale Hyperloop test facility, where we can already prove every conceptual technology of the Hyperloop.
This is Tim Houter, a co-founder and CEO of Hart Hyperloop, headquartered in the city of Delft. And while this testing tube might not seem as large as others, inside is a key technology to create the on- and off-ramp type infrastructure of a Hyperloop network, that is, a lane switch.
That's something we can already test here. You can actually see it here, that a track is diverging from one track into two. That makes it possible to eventually split up the Hyperloop track in two sections. And in that sense, you can create a complete Hyperloop network that in the end will make it possible to travel, for example, over a whole continent. Take Europe, for example, with the same ease as you can now travel with a metro in a city.
The nice thing about this magnetic levitation system that we've developed is that there's absolutely zero moving components in the track. So for example, if you have to do a lane switch, all you do is that the tube basically splits up, and statically the tracks also split up. And whenever the vehicle enters a switch, it either pulls itself to the right with its magnets, or it pulls itself to the left with its magnets.
Lane switching on traditional rail requires the physical movement of the rail. Even modern magnetic levitation tracks use lane switching techniques in order to transfer trains from one track to another.
And this is a very crucial element, because this is the thing that limits the capacity and, in the end, the usefulness of the rail network. Because the moment that a track is switching, that means that at that moment you are creating an unsafe environment for the trains behind it. So you need a lot of space between trains. In a Hyperloop, because you have no moving components in the track, all the vehicles can be much closer to each other. You can achieve a very high frequency and basically have your vehicles moving and merging in and out of the network very much like a highway.
For now, though, Hart's physical testing has been limited by the size of their tube. Because the test track is only 30 meters long, they haven't tested this lane switch at speeds greater than 20 kilometers per hour. However, the company is working to build a new test site where it plans to increase that testing speed to 300 kilometers per hour.
We're now in a phase where we have proven most of the most important technologies in the test facilities that we already have. And we have also demonstrated the viability and the feasibility of a network. If you look at all the subsystems that it consists of, most of those are proven systems, already demonstrated in lab conditions. So we don't really believe that the technology itself is going to be the biggest challenge.
Because for all Hyperloop companies out there, actually building a Hyperloop system requires more than just a good product.
We're talking about the safety aspects, we're talking about integration into the environment, we're talking about the social aspects. Do people feel comfortable traveling in such a system? So it's about all these different aspects, and the complexity is really getting all the different stakeholders that are relevant and that do need to contribute to bring this to market, to get them all following the same roadmap.
In order to help build this coalition of private and public interest in Hyperloop development, HART in 2018 partnered with other Hyperloop companies from Europe and Canada. The goal was to define, establish, and standardize the framework to regulate Hyperloop systems.
Right now we are working with all the Hyperloop developers together in setting up the first, let's say, structure for starting the standards drafting.
One of the most important goals for HART is interoperability, which is essentially making sure the different systems can communicate with each other.
Interoperability is so important because what we want to achieve is actually have this seamless travel experience. So you don't want to end up, for example, going from Madrid to Paris and then switching because you need to use a different technology to get, for example, to Amsterdam.
The idea being that as companies around Europe create the first commercial Hyperloop tracks between individual cities, one day those can all be connected to a larger network.
Everyone that believes that Hyperloop is a future transport system also realizes that there is a need to have this network because that's where Hyperloop thrives.
Hyperloop is such a huge project. It's definitely not something that you can do on your own or as a single company. So you need to do it with a lot of other companies. You need to have the governments. I think in that sense, the biggest challenge that we've encountered is to really get all the required parties together to take the steps in development and in commercial implementation.
HART's next plan is to build the European Hyperloop Center, an open testing facility which will include a 2.6-kilometer test track. And the company hopes to test travel speeds there at up to 700 kilometers per hour. Virgin Hyperloop is also racing to construct the first commercial Hyperloop route, with projects in various states of development in India, Saudi Arabia, and the United States. Recently, the company announced plans to build a Hyperloop certification center in West Virginia, which will include a 6-mile-long test track. Proving the technology here will be crucial if Hyperloop networks can find a home among infrastructure investments that the Biden administration hopes to make.
The idea that there's multiple Hyperloop companies, I think, is a redeeming aspect in the business. People really want to see something happen, so having multiple people move forward is good for that.
I was struck when Josh and Sarah rode the pod. 2 or 3 of the major outlets used the phrase, "We now have a new mode of transport." And although all of that technology had existed before those 2 human beings rode it, it was the moment at which those 2 human beings traveled that short distance down the tube that in popular imagination, Hyperloop became a mode of transport.
The metaphor I use with my team is that, the Wright brothers were first, but none of us fly on Wright Brothers Airlines anymore. If you don't continue to innovate, you're not going to be around, and so we'll continue to be at the forefront of building Hyperloop.
Back in 2013, Elon had an idea. I think the difference now in 2021 is some brilliant engineers have spent real time grinding out the details. And I thoroughly expect the next 3 to 5 years to be decisive.
This week, how hydrogen can transform our energy usage. We'll look at why the universe's most abundant element could be a game changer in the climate revolution.
Hydrogen technologies are not new. They are used in other sectors. We use them in space, on our rockets, and we don't need the laws of physics to change to be able to use hydrogen on our planes.
From iron ore to green hydrogen, one of Australia's richest men tells us about his pivot to sustainable energy.
Let's take action. It's practical, it's implementable. Let's do it now.
Plus, the hydrogen revolution. We'll speak with the CEO of Italian utilities firm Snam about his new book and how green hydrogen could be competitive within 5 years.
Costs are coming down and people are waking up to the fact that it's the only way to decarbonize certain sectors.
From Bloomberg's global headquarters in New York, I'm Kaylee Lyons, and this is Bloomberg Green. It's a new year, so here at Bloomberg Green, we're highlighting new solutions in the fight against climate change. And one of those is as old as the universe itself, hydrogen. It's the simplest element around, but could well be a game changer when it comes to turning around our dependence on fossil fuels. Today, hydrogen is used in the chemicals industry to produce petroleum products. It's also starting to be used in steel production, an industry under a lot of pressure to decarbonize. But it has far more uses as well, from powering cars to heating our homes. And Bloomberg New Energy Finance sees a seismic shift in the sector in the next 10 years as green hydrogen squeezes out dirtier alternatives. So-called gray hydrogen dominates today. But as renewable electricity gets cheaper and more accessible, so will green hydrogen. In this week's edition of Bloomberg Green, we'll explore what this push into hydrogen means for tackling climate change. We'll hear from Australian billionaire Twiggy Forrest about his pivot from iron ore to hydrogen, and we'll also speak with the CEO of Italian utility company Snam about his book, The Hydrogen Revolution. But first, what are we using hydrogen for, and why does it actually matter? Christine Lee Edwards explains.
Hydrogen, the most plentiful element in the universe.
On Earth, we find it mostly bonded to oxygen in the form of water, or in other gases known as hydrocarbons. Hydrogen gas, H2, burns hot and clean, making it an attractive tool in the race to net zero. But isolating hydrogen from other elements is no easy task. Today, the cheapest way to do this is via chemical processes that break up natural gas. This releases a lot of carbon dioxide. Another method is to use electricity to split water molecules in a process called electrolysis. Although there is no carbon byproduct, a lot of electricity is needed. And if this power comes from burning coal or gas, it negates the zero emissions goals of using hydrogen to begin with. Hydrogen produced in this way, powered by fossil fuels, is called gray hydrogen. If carbon capture and storage is used together with fossil fuels, then it becomes blue hydrogen. If nuclear power is used, it's called pink. And finally, green hydrogen is when it's produced via electrolysis and powered from renewable sources. This method is considered emissions-free. It's predicted that by the early 2030s, H2 made from renewables will be cheaper than that made from fossil fuels. But that hinges on the cost of electrolysis declining, which will be achieved through larger projects and an expansion of manufacturing. To be clear, vast amounts of H2 are already used today. Global production in 2018 totaled 117 million metric tons. This hydrogen is mostly used for its chemical properties, not as a source of energy, and very little of it is clean. Some sectors like steel could start using hydrogen for these chemical properties, replacing coal. Industries like cement and glass may also use hydrogen as a source of heat. Another advantage is its energy storage potential. It can be stored over long periods of time and used when more power needs to be added to the grid. It also could hold an advantage over batteries in heavy transport and shipping. The promise of hydrogen for energy has been around since at least 1874, when Jules Verne wrote about it in his book, The Mysterious Island. But the future of hydrogen will depend on policy. Countries with net zero targets, carbon pricing, and hydrogen strategies with investment mechanisms are likely to see the highest H2 demand.
That was Bloomberg's Christine Lee Edwards explaining what hydrogen means for the energy transition. But how are businesses approaching the sector? Well, one of Australia's richest men is making a big play into hydrogen. Andrew Forrest, better known as Twiggy, made his fortune from iron ore, being the chairman, former CEO, and major shareholder in Fortescue Metals, one of the world's biggest miners. But after having made over $10 billion in profit from the metal in the last fiscal year, Twiggy wants to transform Fortescue into a clean energy company. He's been scouring the planet in search of investment opportunities in hydrogen and renewables. The firm plans to allocate up to 10% of its annual profits for green energy investments and is exploring projects across the globe, from Indonesia to Argentina. Francine Lacqua caught up with Twiggy Forrest.
There's only one type of clean hydrogen, all the rest is dirty.
Yeah.
That is green. If you just say green hydrogen is clean, the rest is dirty, then you've actually nailed it. And, you know, anyone else who produces any other rubbish, any other argument, just look them there and say, why is global warming accelerating if anything you're saying is true? And then you'll know, actually, it's greenwashing.
Yeah, but there's a lot of greenwashing because I keep on being told it's a transition. We can't just, make the transition at a click of a finger. So what are we doing wrong? What can we do better?
I don't remember the personal computer having to transition the typewriter. I really don't remember that. I don't remember the smartphone having to transition the pocket calculator and the old landline. You know, its transition line is complete rubbish. The lie got put to it 2 days ago when JCB, a really loved British company, every right for the country to be proud of JCB, and Fortescue, holding a bit of a similar reputation, fantastic track record, everyone's done super well from Fortescue, huge balance sheet, super strong. When those two companies got together and agreed a $7 to $9 billion agreement per annum, right, then that's a real wake-up call to say, hang on, green hydrogen is obviously commercial now. You know, every other form of fossil fuel hydrogen, you know, it can compete with it on price, it can probably lose on price, but what we know, it is cooking the planet. And only green hydrogen, zero methane, zero carbon in the supply chain. Don't worry about the molecules in the supply chain.
But at the moment, we're not even phasing out coal, if you look at the G20 communique. So we have a long way to go to talk about only using green hydrogen.
Yeah, so look, I have a call, which I'd like to make now, that the world should not fund any more coal-fired power stations, coal mining projects, ever. We should wind them down as quickly as possible because they are cooking the planet just like grey and blue hydrogen is cooking the planet.
Yeah.
You know, hydrogen, which is not made from renewable electricity, is releasing 10 to 16 times more carbon, let alone the methane, which is worse, than it is hydrogen. So we've just got to stop doing things which are self-harming under the guise of greenwashing.
So why are leaders so slow? Even if you look at the appetite for ESG investments, they're growing exponentially, so are emissions. So where are we allocating capital?
Okay, so take the recent G20. There's probably a reason why there wasn't strong action coming out of the G20 because people were not aware that major transactions between large companies were taking place now on green hydrogen, that actually this pollution-free all the way to the supply chain fuel is now being transacted at multi-billion-dollar scale. If they'd known that, I don't believe any sovereign leader or any energy minister or climate change minister could not take ultra seriously that green hydrogen is now here to stay. It's broken through. History has been made. It will never go back.
Okay, what is the one thing that you would tell leaders today and business leaders? How do we transition faster than what we are now because we're at real risk of missing our targets?
Oh, so that's really simple. You stop funding, you stop subsidizing, you stop using money into fossil fuels. It could be carbon sequestration, it could be fuel rebates, it could be anything. Hundreds of billions of dollars getting ashed while we ash the planet on fossil fuel subsidies. Because we haven't had that renewable electricity, we haven't had that green hydrogen, we've kind of been pushed down. It's all sorts of excuses. Oh, it'll never be commercial, it'll never be supplied in the quantities we needed, you know, blah, blah, blah. Now we know, let's take action. It's practical, it's implementable, let's do it now.
Okay, if we do it now, is there going to be a shock to the energy system? Is there going to be a shock actually to economically? And is it worth, you know, not talking about transition, just going from A to B?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. A to B is the solution. Let fossil fuels do what fossil fuels do. Just burn their coal, burn their oil, burn the gas. At least they're pumping up carbon and methane into the atmosphere, honestly. Well, not that honest because they don't measure methane, which is 90 times worse than carbon. But at least the carbon is being done honestly. Encourage the green hydrogen sector to come in really fast. Okay, it's there. There's renewable power all over the world. We now know how to make electrolyzers much cheaper, like 25% of the original cost. We know how to do that now. We don't have an excuse to get into it.
Does it need to be cheaper than oil and fossil fuel for it to be viable worldwide?
Well, right now it is. Okay, so let's just swallow that bit of financial data. Right now it is cheaper, and it's getting more cheap. It's the only fuel you know of which is declining in value.
You don't have enough of it, right, to power the world?
Yes. That's only because we haven't had policies to support it. If we had policies to support it 5-10 years ago, it would be everywhere. You'd see the global warming budget start to come down. Now, we've got 5 or 10 years to make a huge difference. I need policy leaders all over the world to appreciate now, okay, big business is transacting with green hydrogen in multi-billion-dollar agreements. We now know it's here and it's here to stay. Let's spread it everywhere.
Coming up on the program, the hydrogen revolution. We'll speak with the CEO of Italian utility firm Snam about his new book and why he thinks green hydrogen will be competitive in just 5 years. Plus, how are airlines working to become more sustainable? We'll look at how Airbus plans to step up in the climate fight. This is Bloomberg Green. From Bloomberg's world headquarters in New York, I'm Kaylee Lines, and this is Bloomberg Green. What will the world look like in 2050? Will global temperatures have stabilized, electric vehicles be abundant, and solar and wind power homes around the world? According to Marco Alvera, the CEO of Italian energy company Snam, that vision of the future could be a reality. And he says that hydrogen will pave its way. As he tells it in his new book, The Hydrogen Revolution, Alvera's moment of reckoning came in November 2018 when he tasked the Snam Scenarios team with studying how Europe could reduce its CO2 emissions to zero by 2050. Looking through the results of the study, Alvera said he was struck by how much hydrogen was in Europe's energy mix by that year. Beyond the abundance of hydrogen, the SNAM model also predicted that it would be the cheapest form of decarbonized energy for many sectors, and that it could be cheaper than today's prices for oil, coal, and nuclear power. Our Maria Tadeo spoke with Alvera at COP26.
It's happening all very fast. We see the cost of hydrogen coming down a lot. Hydrogen will play a big role in the energy mix. I don't know if it's going to be 15 or 25% of a fully decarbonized energy system, but it's going to be big. Costs are coming down, and people are waking up to the fact that it's the only way to decarbonize certain sectors, so-called hard-to-abate sectors.
And you say it's the only way and the costs are coming down. Where do you see prices moving? Because a lot of the reticence at times has to do with the pricing, that some argue, well, it's still not the cheapest option on the market.
So when I was first working in hydrogen in 2004, it was costing $1,000 per megawatt hour. 2010, $600. Today, $100, and we see it going down to $50 in 5 years' time, and to going down to $25 per megawatt hour in the next 10 years or so, which is a quarter of where it is today. That's really because renewable energy, and we're talking green hydrogen here, renewable energy costs are falling, but the cost of making the electrolyzer, which is the kit that you use to convert solar or wind energy and water into hydrogen, the cost of this kit is falling a lot because it doesn't really exist on an industrial scale. So as we build up capacity, we industrialize it, we standardize it, and we squeeze costs out. That's really the cost trajectory.
And for that, of course, you need demand, however, for governments and also institutions to kind of buy into this idea that it is the future and we want to invest and create infrastructure. What are they telling you? When you speak to governments, when you speak to officials, are they keen on this?
They're very keen. So the Department of Energy shares our view in the States of getting to below $1 a kilo, which is $25 a megawatt hour. The European Union has a hydrogen strategy, which is very clear, and several member states have the same. Chile wants to export a lot of hydrogen. China's big on hydrogen. Australia is very big on hydrogen. Japan is blending already hydrogen. So I would say the world is now really focused on this because it's the only way to store energy for a long period of time economically is to convert it into either a liquid or a gas.
And of course, you talk about the price, but the other big component is the volume. You know, how big can you go? Where do you see that on a time scale?
So wherever it's sunny or windy, you can produce very cheap hydrogen eventually. And so compared to oil and gas, which are concentrated in few parts of the world, it's going to be very democratic from that point of view. So every sunny place, every desert, every ocean wind can be turned into hydrogen that we can put on ships, in pipes, and really start trading it around the world. So it's going to happen a lot faster than a lot of people think.
So, and when you say a lot faster, what is that in time?
As I said, $50, which is essentially oil parity within 5 years. And then, depending on how quickly we ramp it up after that, we could get to $25, which is coal parity before the end of the decade.
And in big scale.
In big scale, because once you get to coal parity, that's the only way we're going to get China and India to stop burning new coal. We have businesses in China and in India, and I see a lot of hydrogen development, a lot of renewable development in both countries. The India announcement was incredibly strong on 2030. Some people were upset about the 2017 net zero deadline, but when it comes to 30, he announced a big, big commitment to get to 50% renewables.
Were you surprised by it?
I was surprised that they would make it so explicit, and even the net zero is a big thing for them. And so I think it will happen faster than 2070 because of the falling cost of renewable and hydrogen. India's burning 80 gigawatt of oil, of diesel, to keep the lights on. So there's an immediate opportunity there, and we're very interested in working that country.
And with regards to China, perhaps the fact that we haven't really seen them active, I guess the diplomats are working on this, but we haven't really seen the leadership.
It's going to be technology, it's going to be industry. I think China has committed to a net zero, which is very important. At the G20, China was clearly behind the 1.5 degrees. So I think a lot has been achieved between the G20 and COP. And I think what's really important is to see in the coming years how quick it's in our hands to make part of this happen in 5 years, or it could otherwise happen in 15, 20 years. It's about building the project. The capital is there. We saw how many trillions of dollars are already committed. What's missing is really the projects, and that's where companies like us step in.
Marco Alvera, CEO of SNAM there, speaking with our Maria Tadeo. Let's turn now to the aviation industry. It's a big contributor to global greenhouse gas emissions, and it's under pressure to change that. In October, the International Air Transport Association, a trade body representing airlines, approved a target of achieving net zero emissions by 2050. To achieve that, many airlines in the US and Europe are looking to buy sustainable aviation fuel made from renewable sources like used vegetable oil. Initiatives like these are pushing plane makers to come up with some radical new aircraft that will eventually cater to our growing appetite for travel without hurting the environment. We took a look at how Airbus, the world's #2 aircraft manufacturer, is stepping up to the challenge.
How long until we can fly emission-free? Airbus says it's more confident by the day it can be done by its 2035 target. Airbus's CEO spoke about its ambitions for hydrogen-powered planes at the company's summit in France.
The physics works. Hydrogen technologies are not new. They are used in other sectors. We use them in space on our rockets, and we don't need the laws of physics to change to be able to use hydrogen on our planes. So every day we become more confident, but we think we need to have a plane, we need to have the right fuels, the hydrogen available in the right quantity at the right place at the right time, and we need the regulations to be ready. So we really need the work and the collaboration of many people around the globe to make it happen on time.
But it could be a long wait until green passenger jets go mainstream. Larger aircraft with more than 150 seats are not expected to feature globally until about 2050. That means manufacturers and airlines today are under growing pressure to ramp up short-term innovations to cut their carbon. In the long term, meeting the ambitious plans for so-called green hydrogen means building a giant industry almost from scratch. To make that happen, British airline EasyJet is among those saying governments need to get involved and fast. Aviation's emissions over the last 3 decades leading up to the pandemic grew by about 80% to over 1 gigaton, and that's projected to double by 2050. According to Bloomberg NEF, about half of the airlines with the largest global market share have set net zero targets by that same date, nearly 3 decades away.
Coming up, from blue sky projects to the bottom line. We'll speak with our Bloomberg NEF expert Meredith Annex and dig into their models about how hydrogen fits into the future energy mix. This is Bloomberg Green. From Bloomberg's World Headquarters in New York, I'm Kaylee Lyons, and this is Bloomberg Green. Now let's bring in Meredith Annex, our Bloomberg NEF hydrogen specialist, to talk more about how hydrogen could change the energy landscape. So Meredith, what place do you think hydrogen is likely to have in the future energy mix globally?
Hydrogen's this incredible solution for us as we look to decarbonize because it's a perfect solution in areas that are hard to electrify. So where we like to think about hydrogen playing a role, it's in things like heavy industry, especially where you need a feedstock as well as energy source, and in things like dispatchable power, long-haul transport, maybe even shipping and aviation.
That sounds great that it can be used for such diverse industries. At the end of the day, though, how much is this going to cost?
Well, that's the amazing thing about hydrogen, because depending on how you make it, it can actually see significant cost declines in the future. So when we're talking about clean hydrogen, we usually mean green hydrogen produced from renewable electricity. And in that case, your hydrogen is almost as cheap as the renewables that are used to make it. So if you're in a place with really good renewable resources, you'll be able to have cheaper hydrogen. But even in places with less good resources, we think that hydrogen can be cheaper than $1 per kilogram, which is the price of unabated hydrogen today, and around $8 per million BTUs for those who prefer to think in energy units. And that can be achieved anywhere in the world by 2050, we believe.
All right, so let's talk about kind of the pros and cons list. I don't know where cost fits into that, but what are the advantages to hydrogen over other renewables, and then what are the drawbacks?
Yeah, main advantage is the fact that hydrogen can serve roles that electrons struggle with. And that's things like seasonal storage, for instance, or just anything where you need storability, where electrons are harder to store, hydrogen is going to be easier. That also leads to a downside, though, because hydrogen is less energy dense than the usual things that we use for storable energy today, like coal or oil or natural gas. So you will need more volume of storage to handle the same amount of energy.
Let's talk about the viability as well and how it may differ in different geographies. What is your view on that?
Yeah, so for green hydrogen, again, from renewable electricity, really places with the best renewable resources, things like Latin America or the Middle East, even Southern Europe, have really, really good potential for producing hydrogen. And then when you're looking at blue hydrogen, which is produced from natural gas or coal with carbon capture and storage, we do see that becoming more expensive than green hydrogen in the future, especially as renewable electricity costs come down. But that can be a viable option in places like the US Gulf Coast or Russia, where you've got good geological storage for the carbon, as well as ample natural gas that's quite cheap.
All right, great breakdown. Thank you so much to our Meredith Annex, our Bloomberg NEF hydrogen specialist. And of course, you can get more from the Bloomberg NEF team on the terminal and online. And they've recently done a podcast called Hydrogen 101 as part of its Switched On series. So from iron ore titans pivoting to cleaner energy to talk of a hydrogen revolution, that's it from this week's edition of Bloomberg Green. We'll be back next week with a deep dive into the state of electric vehicles. And you can keep the conversation going by following us on YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter @Climate. I'm Kaylee Lyons from Bloomberg's World Headquarters in New York, and this is Bloomberg Green.
events, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all advancing. We are trading close to session highs. Stocks are rebounding despite lingering worries. The Fed will need to raise rates more aggressively to rein in inflation. Also, traders are continuing to monitor the global response to the war in Ukraine. For the latest developments, keep it locked in to Bloomberg Radio. S&P right now up by 43 points. That is a gain of 1%. The Dow up 244, higher by 0.7%. NASDAQ right now up 168, higher by 1.2%. 10-year yield 2.34%. We do have crude oil tumbling 1.3%, 113.48 a barrel. Gold up 1.1%, 19.65 the ounce. Former U.S. Treasury Secretary Larry Summers says the U.S. will need, quote, significantly greater rate hikes than the Fed or markets expect in order to stem inflation and clear signals of an accepted economic slowdown if that's the price of reducing inflation. He spoke with Bloomberg's David Weston on Wall Street Week.
It's likely to require significantly greater interest rate hikes than the Fed or markets are now expecting. We need clear signals that we're prepared to accept some slowdown in economic activity if that's the price of reducing inflation.
And you can hear Wall Street Week tomorrow afternoon, tomorrow evening, 6 o'clock Wall Street time here on Bloomberg Radio. Sources tell Bloomberg Apple's working on a subscription service for the iPhone and other hardware products, a move that could make device ownership similar to paying a monthly app fee. Right now, Apple shares are up by 1.1%. Uber will list New York's yellow taxis on its app, the first alliance of its kind in the U.S., and an effort to ease a driver shortage and pressure on fares. Uber up 4.5%. Lyft is up by 0.7%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Bloomberg Quick Takes Tim Stenovic on Bloomberg Radio.
Gotta say, this is the kind of day, Tim, where I don't even know which menu to look at. Like, is it top? Is it most read? Am I looking at my market screen? Am I Googling on, Biden or G7? Like, it's just all happening.
It is. Where do you even want to start? Do we start with markets? Do we start with what's going on in Europe?
Well, let's start with, it's all kind of connected, but let's talk with markets because we've got stocks up, Treasury yield climbing again, investors perhaps being reminded or buying more into resilience of the U.S. economic recovery in what's been, safe to say, a wild week, and we're not done yet.
No, we're not. Three stories stay front and center, Carol. First, the war in Ukraine. President Biden in Brussels with NATO, G7, and EU summits are happening about the impact. On that, our most read on the Bloomberg is all about how the West must save globalization. I'm looking forward to that conversation.
It's an opinion piece, but it's a must read. Secondly, the rate environment and Fed policy. On that, we've got the CEO of Citizens Financial Group. And thirdly, we are still in a health pandemic. Do not forget, we're going to take you to one of today's deadliest outbreaks. We're going to take you to a region of the world.
Can I just say?
No.
Okay, I won't say it.
Gosh.
That was a deep tease. Then we lean into the economy of sports, the money around sports, especially when it comes to the NCAA. Also, the latest move by private equity firms.
Yeah.
A lot of good stories in the 4 o'clock hour today.
Everybody trying to cash in. All right, let's get to it and the market drivers report. Let's set your Business Week agenda on this Friday's Eve. Kriti Gupta, markets correspondent at Bloomberg in our Interactive Brokers studio. So too is Michael McKee, international economics and policy correspondent at Bloomberg News. Pick a day, Kriti, and we could be up on equities or we could be down. It just depends on the tone, the tenor, how investors are feeling.
Yeah, it kind of seems like that way.
And the headlines to some extent.
And the headlines. But what's interesting is that it doesn't feel like today is, although there's a ton going on, I don't feel like the markets are really reacting to that. I think, in fact, the most notable move you're going to see in the market is actually what's happening in the VIX. You have a 22 handle on the VIX. And this is something to keep in mind. Year to date, the normal pre-pandemic level on a VIX is about an 8. A 12 handle is like, well, things are really kind of shaky. Post-pandemic, that number has been 20. If you get below 20, if you get to 19, which we did briefly, even to 15, that's a really good sign. Things are kind of returning back to normal. But during the war, the year-to-date kind of Russian invasion talk, and then ultimately the invasion, that number went from 20 to 30, being like the normal wartime VIX, basically. To see that number come down to a 22 today, I think is a really good sign. The question is it sustainable? And we have actually seen volatility in the United States come down a lot in the last couple of weeks. European volatility is actually ticking higher, and that's going to be a divergence you really want to keep your eye on.
Yeah, we've been up, close to 40, right? 36, above 36, like earlier this month. All right, Michael McKee, what do you got for us?
Well, I was thinking about this morning when I saw the headline on the Bloomberg, the NATO would respond to a nuclear incident.
Can I just say that's the thing that is...
That's what Carol's been talking about all day.
I'm obsessed with it and
But it's like more than an incident. But it does affect Europe more than the United States, which is why I think we're seeing the calm in the markets, and treasuries have calmed down too, because basically investors here have looked at the war now for a month and figured out it's not a huge threat to the United States except for inflation, which now the Fed is on the job. And we are hearing from more and more Fed officials that they're going to move faster than anticipated and go after inflation, and that seems to be reassuring people somewhat.
Well, why are we seeing this reassurance, though? Because we are still seeing serious inflationary concerns, but it does seem like at least equity investors are really brushing it off.
Yeah, I mean, I won't speak for equity investors, but when you look at the impact, obviously you can invest in defense stocks and do well because they got to replace all these anti-tank missiles. But oil prices, they were already going up. And so people knew that. And we already know from all of the oil producers that it's going to take them a while to ramp up and produce more oil. So now that's in the calculation. And the inflation was already there. That's in the calculation. And I think we're at a point now where it would take some sort of change to scare the equity side and to really move bonds now that they've adjusted.
Well, this plays so much into, I feel like, Creedy, what Gina Martin-Adams says of our Bloomberg Intelligence team, that in terms of the negativity, so much negative news was priced in, right? And so now maybe we're having a recalibration, to kind of piggyback on what Mike was saying in terms of the equity trade. Okay, we get it. Yeah. It's kind of crummy out there. So maybe we breathe a little sigh of relief, and maybe there's some opportunity here, certainly on the equity side.
What's so great about Gina's work is that she goes into the numbers on the corporate side. She goes into margin, she goes into earnings, and she says this is exactly what investors are responding to. I could never do what Gina Martin-Adams does, but what I can do is say my number one, I think you guys, I say this on your show all the time, so when I look at the stock market, I really just look at the economy, and this is where I'll repay Mike and talk about his arena. But basically, in my view, the stock market should go higher if the American consumer is fine and steady. And one of the reasons that you saw all this kind of volatility in the markets to begin with, it wasn't necessarily because of the war, because as dark as war is, the U.S. economy and the U.S. markets actually do really well in wartime because they mobilize, it creates more jobs, it creates more production. There's a whole dynamic to it. But the concern here was that these commodity shocks would then hurt the end consumer, which would then hurt the spending, which would then kind of collapse the whole economy into recession. I think it's pretty clear here. Now, yes, there will be a commodity shock, but that the consumer is a little bit more firm in terms of being able to weather that demand destruction. I think those fears have gone away a little bit, and that's why you're seeing stocks higher. And
why aren't small caps doing a lot more, though? If we feel comfortable about the domestic home front, right?
It's a very different. Small caps are on their own planet right now because you have to still keep in fact that there is risk out there. So you have to this is where size kind of matters. You want the large cap companies, even if they are in those cyclically sensitive sectors. And small caps just never made that recovery post-pandemic that I think a lot of people wanted them to.
Mike McKee, 1969. I want to end with some economic data here, okay? Initial jobless claims at a 53-year low. How should we read into that?
When I first saw the number, I mean, your first thought is that's an outlier because it's such a big move and it's so low. But it does tell you that the job market is in very good shape and companies are not laying people off. And of course they wouldn't when there's 4 million jobs open still. So that's just reassuring to the Fed that the market the labor market can withstand.
I didn't even think about the economic news today because there's so much stuff going on. Stupid me. Hey, you've got a panel just quickly, virtually coming up. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, coming up with 3 former Fed officials, Charlie
Say that
Plosser,
5 times
Dennis
fast.
Lockhart, and Jeff Lacker. We're going to talk about Fed independence.
Looking forward to it. Anything that Michael McKee did. Anything that Michael McKee. See, I can't
say that 3 times fast.
I can't even say it once. Michael McKee, Creedy, thank you so much.
Let's get to Washington, D.C. with Nancy Lyons for World and National News. Hey, Nance.
Thanks.
Thanks, Tim. It's been a busy day for President Biden with meetings with NATO, G7, and EU leaders. He says they have agreed to boost troop deployments in the eastern portion of the defense alliance, with the U.S. also committing $1 billion more toward humanitarian aid for those who fled Ukraine. President Biden says Russian President Vladimir Putin made a major miscalculation.
Putin was banking on NATO being split. My early conversation with him in December and early January was clear to me he didn't think we could sustain this cohesion. NATO has never been more united than it is today. Putin is getting exactly the opposite what he intended to have as a consequence of going into Ukraine.
Biden said during today's discussions he told leaders the U.S. would increase its wheat production along with Canada to help deal with shortages resulting from the Russian war in Ukraine. It is the last day of the Senate confirmation hearing for federal judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, President Biden's pick for the Supreme Court. Today's session featured witnesses offering various opinions on Judge Jackson and her career. The American Bar Association's Ann Claire Williams testified to Jackson's qualifications.
The Standing Committee voted unanimously that Judge Jackson earned our highest rating, well qualified for an appointment to the Supreme Court.
The ABA's Ann Claire Williams says the bar's reviewers found no evidence that Jackson is soft on crime, as Republicans have charged during the hearings. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries.
All right, Nancy Lyons, thank you so much. Nancy Lyons with World and National News in our 991 newsroom in Washington, D.C. Housing market, Tim, is so hot.
It's so hot right now.
How hot is it?
Well, it's so hot that even a Fed governor can't buy a home. Christopher Waller says that he's been struggling to find a house in the, quote, crazy Washington, D.C. market. This is wild.
Oh, my God. He said this in his speech today. Fed governors, they make $203,700 this year, according to information on the central bank's website. Housing market, you know it's been on a tear. We've talked about it, whether it's millennials starting families, remote workers looking to relocate, especially down south. We're seeing a lot of movement there. And the prospect of rising mortgage rates fueling a buying frenzy before it becomes even more costly to borrow. And this is one thing. Right now, what do we see? U.S. mortgage rates surging this week to 4.42% for a 30-year loan. It's more expensive, and so if you're thinking about buying, you're gonna rush out and do it.
You're gonna rush out and do it
before rates go even higher.
Yeah, because the higher that rates go, the more that you have to pay to interest each month.
Right.
So at a certain point, Carol, we should start to see prices fall for homes because that monthly payment has so much to do with affordability.
And less demand. It just goes down, right?
Yeah, but I also hear some housing experts say it's not going to happen because we have such a supply problem.
Well, that's the bigger issue, and that's what 60 Minutes covered as well, Tim.
Oh, I should go back and watch that.
Carol, you watch 60 Minutes?
You do.
But that's exactly what they got into. I used to have trouble getting my head around this because after the financial crisis, right, and that mortgage market meltdown, right?
There were homes being picked up by the six-pack.
People were talking about, why don't we just blow up a bunch of houses so that we can correct the supply-demand imbalance? And then all of a sudden, here we are. As a result of that, apparently there was just not lots and lots of building for a long time. And so now we have a supply deficit.
We also have it in areas where there isn't much building happening, right? If you think about areas of New York City where there isn't necessarily the land to actually build these homes.
So Waller, he said longer run structural issues will continue to put upward pressure on home prices and rents even as the central bank begins a campaign to raise borrowing costs. So he, like others, are going to have some trouble finding a house.
$203,000, $700,000 a year. That's a lot.
Not too bad.
headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all pushing higher right now. 11 of the main industry groups in the S&P 500 are rising. S&P up now by 43 points, up by 1%. Stocks are gaining as investors weigh economic resilience against the threats of rising rates and the impact of the war in Ukraine. The Dow up 257, up by about 0.7%. NASDAQ up 163, up by 1.2%. 10-year yield, 2.34%. 10-years at 2.34%. 10-years down 14.30 seconds. Spot gold up 1.1%, up $21 the ounce at $19.65. West Texas Intermediate crude down 1.7%, $112.98 a barrel. Bank of America has renewed its longtime co-brand credit card partnership with Alaska Air Group through 2030 after the airline said the tie-up generated record revenue last year. Today, Bank of America down 0.2%. Alaska Airlines up by 2.2%. Recapping S&P up 1%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Well, we've been watching bank stocks in a big way this week due to the move up in rates, or the volatility in rates, if you will. All the Fed talk about monetary policy. As a whole, bank stocks down roughly about 2% year to date, compared with a nearly 6% drop in the S&P 500. Citizens Financial Group, though, Tim, up around 3% so far this year.
Joining us now is the chairman and CEO of Citizens Financial Group, Bruce Van Saun. He's with us in the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. Bruce, how are you? Good. Bruce, I just want to start.
Are you really, with everything going on?
Yeah.
Tell me how crazy is it right now?
Well, it's a really interesting time to be in banking. So there's a lot of things happening in the macroeconomic environment, but then just the level of competition, the technology changes of everything moving digital. It's just lots of challenges, which makes things fun to me.
Okay, so when we have been trying to figure out what happens next. And, just when we thought the end of last year, we thought we had a good handle on things. Of course, then you have the Ukraine war. And we know the costs, and we talk about the humanitarian costs, which, there is no excuse for. But we're trying to figure out kind of where it all goes. Do you feel like you have good visibility? Because you play into individuals, small businesses, institutional. What are you seeing from them? What are you hearing?
Well, I'd say the economy's still on a very solid footing. The major worry at the moment is inflation. That inflation is very harmful. It affects businesses. It affects individuals, particularly those at the lower end of the economic means. And so getting inflation back under control is a very urgent task. And I think the Fed now is on it. They've made the first hike, and I think they've talked about being aggressive. This is job one, is to bring this down. So I think they'll hopefully engineer a soft landing. That's what would be the desired outcome.
Right.
But I think the economy has enough power that if they go about it the right way and they're measured and they start to bring inflation down, this could be a very good year for the U.S. economy. For stocks, ultimately, could kind of bounce back if you get some kind of stalemate or resolution in the Ukraine and the Fed does its job. It can still be quite a positive year.
What does it mean to you in terms of how the Fed actually can pull this off? Does that mean a 50 basis point?
Yeah, I think they probably should step it up a little bit for the next meeting or two, and then kind of they can sit back and digest. If they start to see the numbers coming back down, then they could kind of drop back to 25 and just, again, take the data in and even pause after a certain time. But right now the market is projecting that the short rates go up to maybe 2.5 by the end of the year. Historically speaking, that's still relatively low from an absolute standpoint. So I don't think it chokes off economic activity. It doesn't choke off all the private equity money going to work trying to get deals done. The pipelines for deals are still very strong, and people see that the Fed's telegraphed what's happening.
What's the biggest part of your business? Deposits, loans? loans, individual loans, business
Well,
loans?
the kind of overall mix of our loan book is about 54% consumer and 46% commercial. So we're pretty well balanced between serving individuals. I'd put small businesses in with individuals, and then the commercial side, we cover companies, middle market companies from 25 million up to mid-corporate companies with 3 billion in revenues. So that's been our focus.
What's demand among those two sides of the business in terms of just business overall, loan demand, and I'm also curious about deposits, especially among individuals. Are they higher than normal, or?
Yeah, deposits are still elevated given all the liquidity that the Fed pumped into the system and that the government pushed out into the economy. So I think most banks are sitting with relatively low loan to deposit ratios, and we've been waiting for loan demand to pick up. We are seeing that.
And higher rates to be able to charge on those
loans.
Right,
to make more money with the higher rates. So it looked going into the year that all that was lined up very well because the loan growth in fourth quarter was quite high, both on the consumer side and on the commercial side. Companies starting to draw down on their lines again so they could make investments in inventories and plant and equipment to meet the higher demand that they saw coming. So those were all good signs. We haven't really seen an interruption in that yet. So the first quarter, it's still held in pretty good. But again, back to the macro, the fear is if the Fed moves more aggressively or if people start to pull back and say, well, I don't know what's going to happen, that could cool that off a little bit. But at this point, I'm going to stay optimistic and say that won't happen.
Bruce, I want to go back to something that you said a little earlier at the start of our discussion, talking about inflation and it hurting the consumer at the lower end of the income spectrum. What do you hear from small businesses, from medium-sized businesses, middle-market businesses about inflation and the effect that it's having on their costs?
Well, it depends on the nature of the business. I think many companies have been able to pass through the inflation, so they're maintaining their margins. And I'd say the bigger the company, maybe the bigger capacity to do that. Maybe not always as easy for smaller businesses, but even small businesses like restaurants. Have you been out and had a steak lately? Or
exactly.
There's the higher costs for labor and for the supplies, the meat and other ingredients has gone up. So many people are able to pass that through at this point.
What about for you and your firm? Are you seeing higher costs associated with labor?
We've had to pay people more. One of the nice things as an offset is those higher rates mean we're going to start repricing our loans faster than we reprice deposits. And so that additional income allows us to cover some of that higher cost of our people at this point. The other thing that we constantly are seeking to do is to look for ways to run the bank more efficiently. And so we're trying to substitute capital. Can you use artificial intelligence or can you use bots to automate some tasks that used to require people that were probably less enriching from a kind of growth standpoint, the jobs and menial things that get in the way of people enjoying their careers. Can we kind of take those off the table and allow people to do some of the more higher value add stuff?
We're talking with Bruce Van Saun, Chairman and CEO of Citizens Financial Group. What is the importance of still having branches? Like, I'm amazed. I'll even walk in like the City branch around the corner, and it's like it's pretty
well. We
empty.
just made a big play to get into New York Metro by buying HSBC's East Coast branches and then buying Investors Bank, which is we just got approval on this week from the Fed, so that'll close shortly. But that'll give us a combined 200 branches in the New York Metro area, top 10 deposit market share, 1 million new customers. People say,
I'm saying you're all in on branches.
We're still in on branches. So you say, well, Bruce, you also launched a digital bank, so you have Citizens Access that's doing business in 50 states. Why do you need branches? Interestingly, our most satisfied customers value all our distribution channels. So if you have a branch network where you can offer advice, you have a digital channel where people can use their phone and bank on their phone and make check deposits and check balances, so it's convenience. You're offering convenience. And then on the weekend, the branches aren't open and you have a question, you can call the contact center. If you have all those channels working at a high level seamlessly together, that's when you have a really satisfied customer.
So it's omni-channel like retail.
Yes.
Exactly.
That's what's happening.
Yeah.
I just interviewed earlier today Jason Wilk, the CEO of Dave. It's a $3 billion market cap, fintech startup. But the idea is to displace banks the same way that Chime is looking to do that. How do you make sure that these, digital-first fintechs don't take customers from you?
Well, I think there's lots of examples. You mentioned those. There's the payments companies are trying to take revenue streams away from banks. I think what banks have is a full product set and an ability to be an individual's trusted advisor on their life's journey. So that's where we're trying to position ourselves, that you should open your bank account at Citizens and look at all the great things we can do for you. We can give you wealth advice. We can figure out how to refinance your student loans. We can help you buy your first house. We can give you a home equity line of credit when that's an advantageous way to borrow. So banks that can give you that advice to make you more successful on your financial journey, I think that's hard for some of these startups to compete against. And they can go in and they can offer, since they're kind of, a lot of times the profit motive is relaxed, so they can offer services at below cost to try to gain customers, but ultimately, can they really deepen that customer relation and turn those into profitable relationships is still an open question. So the market is valuing them on their growth rates, and so they're all pushing really hard to just acquire customers. Many of these companies aren't profitable, and the question is, what's the ultimate outcome for them?
But ultimate outcome is you want to make sure you're bringing in younger customers, right? That you hold on, grab them young, and
we
hope.
do, and
are you?
And we are. So one of the things we're focused on, mass affluent young professionals. One of our lead hook products there is student loan financing for those people listening. If you're carrying some high cost student debt,
many are, unfortunately.
There's opportunities to consolidate that into a single loan at a lower interest rate. We put money back in your pocket. And so that's allowed us to gain a lot of market share and get younger in our customer base.
Quick question, home buying, is it happening, slowing down? Just quickly.
Home buying is still in good shape. There's people who are kind of figuring out the next phase of their life, and they're moving around a bit. And so I think the purchase market's going to stay strong this year.
Thank you so much. Great interview. And thanks so much for giving us a bunch of time. Bruce Van Saun, he's Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Citizens Financial Group here in our Interactive Broker studio.
People are still buying homes. We talked about mortgage rates going up, right?
I know people buying homes, trying to buy homes.
Trying.
A little bit of a bidding war.
Yeah, exactly.
Helps if you have all cash.
That certainly does. Again, a big thank you to Bruce Van Saun, Chairman and CEO of Citizens Financial Group. Let's get to Charlie Pellet for an update on the markets. 90 minutes until the close, Charlie.
Indeed, stocks higher across the board. You mentioned those mortgage rates, Tim. Mortgage rates surging to 4.42%, highest since January of 2019. Citizens Financial stock up today, along with a lot of other banks. CFG up by 0.4%. JP Morgan Chase up now by 0.1%. Citigroup up 0.1%. Bank of America lower by 0.3%. Wells Fargo little changed, up by about 0.1%. Bottom line here, stocks are gaining as investors weigh economic resilience against the threats of rising rates and the impact of the war in Ukraine. S&P up 42, up by 1%. We've got the Dow up 247 now, up 0.7%. Nasdaq up 170, up by 1.2%. 10-year yield 2.34%. 2-year yield 2.11%. Spot gold up 1%, 1962 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude retreating by 2.4%, 112.18 per barrel of WTI. As for the interest rate outlook, Esty Dweck is Chief Investment Officer at Flowbank.
It's a question of seeing if the market is thinking at some point that the Fed will achieve this soft landing, and I would agree that it has a better chance given the current growth momentum and the savings that U.S. consumers have compared to previous instances. When you look at the very long end, then it doesn't look like there's as much of a concern about growth. But then when you look at the Fed futures market, you're starting to see rate cuts coming in already maybe at the end of 2023. So a very mixed picture.
And again, we do have the 10-year at 2.34%. The shares of embattled electric big rig maker Nikola are higher after the company started production of revenue-generating trucks and showed it is making progress on hydrogen infrastructure. Nikola revealed the milestones in a presentation to Wall Street analysts. Shares of Nikola, they are up now by about 3.5%. Recapping stocks higher, S&P up 0.9. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much for that update. Well, among our most read on the Bloomberg, and you'll understand why in just a moment. It's also today's Bloomberg Big Take. It's a story. It's a must-read from our editorial team. And this one, Tim, is about how the West must save globalization.
The piece in Bloomberg Opinion, today's Big Take, as Carol mentioned, it's by John Micklethwaite and Adrian Woolridge. James Gibney is editor at Bloomberg Opinion. He joins us now on the phone from Washington, D.C. James, I want to start just where our colleagues John Micklethwaite and Adrian Woolridge start, which is back before the First World War. So why is it necessary to understand the attitudes in Europe ahead of the First World War to really understand where we are today?
Well, both Micklethwaite and Woolridge argue that we're really at an inflection point that's very similar to what happened in 1913, 1914. There was a lot of complacency about the direction of history, a lot of discussion of the inevitability of progress, the brotherhood of man, and all that good stuff. And for consumers and capitalists, it was really all signs were pointing in the right direction.
Well, go ahead, please. No, continue.
That just points to where we were prior to the invasion of Ukraine in many ways.
I mean, and not even all the way back to 2020, right? We were there in January 2022.
Correct. I mean, sure, we'd been dealing with COVID, and it's not as if there weren't previous shocks to globalization, whether you want to talk about 9/11 or 2008 and the economic meltdown, or even 2016 with Brexit and the election of Donald Trump. But in the main, I think people viewed the pandemic as a sort of a temporary disruption, and we would sort of pick up the pieces and move on from there.
I love how the column kicks off here about John Maynard Keynes and his description of the leisurely life of an upper-middle-class Londoner in 1913, and it talks about picking up the phone.
I didn't know you could call and order tea on the phone in 1913.
Right, akin to us like going on Amazon, right, and ordering anything and it just delivered to our door. I mean, the point is the similarities, and I know it's an opinion column, but it reminds us a lot of history to remind us of this other time that felt in many ways eerily like today.
It's true, and it does sound very familiar. It feels very familiar, and I think that people just assume that progress is inevitable, that these disruptions can be handled, and now we're facing a disruption that the authors are worried that we might not be able to handle.
Okay, so here we are in March 24th, 2022. We're entering the second month of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. We just heard from President Biden, who's in Europe, and he was asked about shocks to the economy, not just energy, but also food prices, of course, with Russia and Ukraine providing so much wheat to much of Europe. What does it mean, James, for how we should look forward to understand what the world looks like on the other side of this conflict?
Well, I think one of the points the authors were really stressing is one that doesn't get enough attention, which is there's been a lot of focus on security and what we need to do in order to rebuff what Putin has done in Ukraine. But there's been less talk about the need to support this whole idea of economic interdependence. And, COVID was a big shock in that regard, but this is an even bigger shock in terms of the disruption to commodity markets, in terms of the disruption to European security and their notion of stability and what they feel they can deal with in the years ahead. So, it really is, the emphasis that they want people to look at is what can we do to strengthen economic interdependence, because that's really going to bind like-minded nations together.
It's interesting, too, that we did think like globalization. We even think about this when it comes to diversity, right? That you see all of the consultants and the McKinseys of this world who put out research data that says diversity is important and it helps your financial bottom line. So you just think that that's the way things will go. We know that that hasn't been the case. And the same thing for globalization, that the whole idea that it just lifts everybody, right? Everybody benefits, although that hasn't necessarily clearly played out. But that's not enough to maybe keep globalization going.
Right, and I think that one of the challenges that Biden faces, as the authors note, is that he's going to have to persuade people in his own party to embrace policies that some of them are not happy about, which is, for example, greater free trade.
Exactly.
But greater free trade is something that I think many people would argue helped propel what the authors describe as a nativist into the White House in 2016.
Correct. And that's why when you pursue greater free trade, you have to do it with an eye on some of the problems that globalization has aggravated, whether it's economic inequality or problems with the environment. So it really is a moment where you need to recast your previous assumptions about what makes interdependence and globalization work, and focus on the negatives, focus on addressing the negatives as much as promoting the positives.
How do you do that, though? How in 2022, in a world where so much conversation in recent years, especially at the start of the pandemic, when supply chains were so under strain with regard to medical supplies and pharmaceuticals, companies talking about onshoring or reshoring, how is that something that a politician can sell?
If you knew the answer to that, you'd be the leader of the free world, Tim.
That's right.
Hey, I get to ask the questions.
Maybe King
Tim
right? Stanovan.
I don't have to answer them, fortunately. I don't know the answer to that. It's true.
It's a very tough challenge.
Yeah.
I think that's the much harder challenge than doing things like maintaining, a steady supply of weaponry and economic and humanitarian aid to Ukraine. I mean, it's really convincing the rest of the world, because remember that you look at these UN General Assembly votes where a vast majority of the world's nations voted to condemn the invasion, but 40 nations representing a majority of the world's population, including China and India and South Africa, either abstained or voted not to condemn the invasion. And that suggests that they have some serious reservations about the way things have been going and the way they want things to go moving forward.
Hey, James, just got about 35 seconds left here. I think about our audience, and we've been saying, this is a must-read story. Everybody should sit down and read it in its entirety. What do you think the Bloomberg audience needs to kind of take away from this column?
I think they need to take away from this column the importance of history and why we need to avoid making the same mistakes we've made in the past. And there are good examples of how you can do that in the post-1945 period, and bad examples, the post-1918 period. So, look at the history, take your lessons, and move forward from there.
Gosh, it's incredible. James Gibney, thank you so much. Editor of Bloomberg Opinion. As we mentioned, this is our most read on the Bloomberg. It's also the Bloomberg Big Take, this incredible Bloomberg Opinion column.
Check out the Big Take and more from the Bloomberg Big Take on the Bloomberg Terminal, also at bloomberg.com/Big Take. Let's stay in Washington, D.C., check in with Nancy Lyons, who's at our 99.1 newsroom in the nation's capital. Hey, Nance.
Thanks, Tim. President Biden says Russian President Vladimir Putin was wrong to assume that NATO would be divided over Ukraine. Following several meetings among NATO, G7, and European leaders today, Biden says Russia's invasion has built greater unity. He also was asked by one reporter what would happen if Russia escalates the war by using chemical weapons.
It would trigger a response in kind. Whether or not you're asking whether NATO would cross, we'd make that decision at the time.
Biden says there were also discussions in today's meetings about removing Russia from the G20, or at the very least, letting Ukraine sit in on the meetings. Former President Donald Trump is suing Hillary Clinton, the Democratic Party, and several others, alleging a vast conspiracy to malign his character and cast doubt on the legitimacy of his 2016 election win. The suit, filed today in federal court in Florida, names more than a dozen defendants, many of whom have long been vilified in right-wing media as enemies of Trump. Well, Trump will put his status as a Republican kingmaker to the test this weekend in Georgia.
The former president is holding a rally in North Georgia Saturday night for former Senator David Perdue, who's challenging Governor Brian Kemp in the Republican primary, and for Congressman Jody Hice, who's taking on Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger. Trump has been pushing to oust both incumbents after they refused to overturn his loss to President Biden in 2020. Polls show Governor Kemp is still maintaining a double-digit lead over Perdue ahead of the May 24th primary. He also has nearly 15 times as much cash on hand as Perdue. In Washington, I'm Nathan Hager, Bloomberg Radio.
Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries.
All right, Nancy, thank you so much. Carol Massar along with Tim Stanovic. So we're going to talk in just a moment about one of the world's deadliest outbreaks when it comes to the health pandemic. In the meantime, the Moderna CEO, Stéphane Bancel, catching up with our TV colleagues and talking about future COVID variants. He says chances are roughly 1 in 5 that new COVID-19 variants will arise that are more dangerous than the current versions.
You know, I'm a glasses half full type of person.
You are
So I like to
very
think
much an
about this in the
optimist.
sense of the vaccines are 80% effective in the new
I don't
variants,
think about
right?
that 20%.
Yeah, not 1 in 5. That's a scarier way to look at it. Okay, so let's go to what Stéphane Bancel said in an interview this morning on Bloomberg TV. The more likely scenario is that vulnerable people, such as the elderly and immunocompromised, will need annual boosters for protection against strains that are similar in virulence to Omicron. The CEO spoke on the day of a company event detailing its research and progress with messenger RNA vaccines.
So it's interesting, and let's be fair, those companies that play into the vaccine world, Moderna, Pfizer, BioNTech, these are big players, and they have made a lot of money. I'm just going to put it out there, certainly because of the vaccine.
Tens of billions of dollars.
Yeah, like we've seen some of the numbers,
main
right?
Companies that make mRNA.
Right. So Moderna working to reassure investors about its longer-term growth prospects as the new cases decline following the winter spread of that highly transmissible Omicron. However, Omicron's BA.2 subvariant continues to circulate, leading to concerns about a resurgence and the emergence of a new strain or strains of the virus with greater power to infect and sicken. You and I constantly, when we're talking about the health pandemic and waiting for it to become endemic, as much as we know and so much more than we did more than 2 years ago when it all got underway, there's still stuff we don't know.
Yeah, there's a lot that we don't know. We don't know what the next wave is going to look like here in the U.S. I was looking at data from London a little earlier today, and they're on an uptick in terms of cases right now.
Right, and there's no universal vaccine. It's not like the flu. Like we talked about the difference between the flu shot and COVID, why we don't have a universal, or we know we're just going to have a new shot every year, right? And we just take it like the flu shot. So still a lot of questions out there. We're going to talk more about the vaccine and COVID.
Headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Just over an hour to go until the closing bell. All 11 main industry groups in the S&P 500 index are higher. The S&P holding close to session highs. Right now up 38 points, a gain of 0.9%. Investors are weighing economic resilience against the threats of rising rates and the impact of the war in Ukraine. The Dow's up 226, higher by 0.7%. NASDAQ up 160, a gain there of 1.1%. 10-year down 12.30 seconds. 10-year yield 2.33%. Spot gold up 1%. 19.63 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude down 3.3%. 111.13 a barrel on WTI. Sources tell Bloomberg Apple is working on a subscription service for the iPhone and other hardware products, a move that could make device ownership similar to paying a monthly app fee. Apple shares, right now, they are up by 1.2%. Recapping, S&P higher by 35, up 0.8. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. So a story online at Bloomberg Business Week on the Bloomberg Terminal. It's about Hong Kong and how it went from COVID-0 to one of the world's deadliest outbreaks, Tim.
How did this happen? Well, Joel Weber is editor at Bloomberg Business Week. He's with us in the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. Ian Marlowe is Asia Government Senior Reporter for Bloomberg News. He joins us on the phone from Canada. The story by Ian Marlowe and Shirley Zhao. You can read Ian's story on the Bloomberg Terminal and at Bloomberg.com/businessweek. Joel, when we think about Hong Kong and during the course of the pandemic, oftentimes we think about how good of a job it has done in controlling the spread of the outbreak. It was all well and good until Omicron.
COVID-0 worked really, really well for a long time in Hong Kong, and then all of a sudden it didn't. And what's really surprising about Ian's reporting in this story is it shows, just how contagious something like Omicron can be. They had some mechanisms in place, and they basically were overwhelmed by them because the virus spread so quickly and became incredibly lethal because there was also some lackadaisical qualities that I think were bred, and a lot of people never got vaccinated. There's distrust between citizens and state that are probably unique to Hong Kong. Ian, from the outside looking in, you live in Hong Kong, you're stuck in Toronto, can't get back yet. And yet this, has been a devastating impact on especially the elderly community in Hong Kong. What did you learn outside looking in during the course of reporting the story?
Yeah, I think the one thing that really struck me was just how little the government had done to prepare for what to the rest of us seemed like the inevitable, the fact that the virus was going to come in. It looked like they were basically overconfident, that there was a case of hubris. And we had seen this kind of play out across a couple of different sort of COVID-0 or elimination places, like in Taiwan and in New Zealand and in the mainland right now, which is also facing a big outbreak. But I think everyone sort of assumed that at least the government might have been doing something, ramping up isolation facilities, for example, or having some kind of contingency plan in place, for once cases started rising beyond the capacity of these really onerous travel restrictions and contact tracing regimes that had kept the virus out for so long, because, of course, they had these contingency plans in place in general for pandemics because of their experience with SARS about 20 years ago. So it was pretty shocking, I think, for the city to go from a place that was totally calm, had spent 2 years basically dodging the worst of the pandemic, to then end up in a 2020-style outbreak in 2022 when there's vaccines that are fully available for everyone. So I think that was shocking, I think, for people in Hong Kong.
Ian, can you explain what it's like there for people who haven't been to Hong Kong, for people who haven't spent time there? Very densely populated. A lot of people live in really, really small homes. And I mean, when I say small, I mean the way you write about them is you describe them as coffins.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, in Hong Kong, the government refers to them as subdivided housing units, but really we're talking about a bed with some stuff strung up around it. There's a lot of inequality in Hong Kong. It's obviously one of the most expensive housing markets in the world. A lot of people in a lot of the poorest neighborhoods are crammed into places that just will not work with a mainland China-style lockdown. And so that was one of the reasons why the government from the beginning was kind of reluctant to really impose the kind of harsh measures that everyone is familiar with from Wuhan and other Chinese cities. But once Omicron got in, this isn't a place really where you can even really isolate at home. I mean, the high rises of New York and other American cities are one thing, but I mean, Hong Kong, everyone is sort of packed into 10% of the landmass. It's one of the densest cities on Earth. And so there was a lot of what they call, in epidemiological terms, vertical transmission. People were infecting their neighbors up and down. There were, bathroom and kitchen exhaust fans that were kicking the virus all around these really densely populated high-rises. And once Omicron got in, it really raced like wildfire through the city. And there was a race, kind of whack-a-mole, locking down all these high-rise towers. At one point early on in the pandemic, my building was locked down entirely because there was a single COVID case in one of the two towers. And so cops pulled up outside, locked everyone in until everyone had been tested, and everyone tested negative. So this is a city that really took everything very seriously. But once the cases started, going from a handful to tens of thousands a day. At one point, it was well over 50,000 a day in a city that had spent most of the last year at 0 cases a day. Their measures just could not keep up with what was happening, and the healthcare system just utterly and totally collapsed.
Ian, how much of a problem, too, is, it obviously sounds like a policy failure. We talk about, you write about the government's enforcement of the new national security law and how that has effectively banned political opposition. And I think about, lack of access to maybe more global media to really understand this global pandemic. How much of that is also to blame?
Yeah, I think there's a large element of this preventable outbreak that was political. Hong Kong has adopted a mainland-style COVID-0 approach to total elimination of the virus. So there was no tolerance for any cases whatsoever, even when vaccines were being administered throughout the city. So this was a problem from the very beginning that had, political roots. The last 2 years of the pandemic have basically been 2 years of Beijing taking unprecedented political control over Hong Kong in the wake of those democracy protests that everyone saw in 2019, which only really dissipated once social distancing measures came down because of the pandemic.
Right.
So even as the city was, preparing for this, preparing for the pandemic and putting in all these measures, Beijing was taking more control, and what was generally considered a very efficient, technocratic, free market government just became more and more under the sway of China.
All right, we got to run. Hey, listen, great stuff. Ian, thank you so much. Ian Marlowe, of course, of Bloomberg News, and Joel Weber, editor of Bloomberg Business Week.
March is Women's History Month, and every day this month we are celebrating significant moments in women's history. Now with your installment for Thursday, March 24th, here's Bloomberg's Renita Young.
On this day in women's history in 1996, Shannon Lucid becomes the first female U.S. astronaut to live aboard a space station. She entered the Russian space station Mir from the U.S. space shuttle Atlantis. And while on board the Mir, Lucid helped complete several physical science and life science experiments. She returned to Earth on September 26th of that year. After completing her 5th mission, Lucid had logged more than 223 days in space. She received her Bachelor of Science degree in chemistry from the University of Oklahoma. Then she earned a Master's of Science and Doctor of Philosophy in biochemistry. That's today in women's history. I'm Renita Young, Bloomberg Radio.
A big thank you to Renita Young for today in women's history. Coming up, it's our countdown to the close with our friends at Bloomberg TV. The Dow up 0.7%, the S&P up 0.9%. Bloomberg.
down to the close. Bloomberg's comprehensive cross-platform coverage ahead of the U.S. market close starts right now.
This is Countdown to the Close, just 60 minutes left in your trading session. Caroline Hyde, Taylor Riggs, Katie Greifeld, joined now by our colleagues, of course, Carol Massa, Tim Stenovic, as we welcome our audiences, TV, radio, YouTube, to once again, stocks up, yields up.
Isn't it amazing? It feels like some calmness. We've seen the VIX come down as well. I'm like, don't you guys know what's going on in Europe? We're going to talk about this a little bit later on, but I'm kind of obsessed with the headlines coming out of Europe and wondering when this will come to an end, or does it go on for longer? And then there will be even more problems, certainly, on the global economy and then, of course, on the cost of people.
Well, investors are certainly optimistic about chips today. I'm looking at the stocks. It's up more than 4.3% right now. All components, all 30 components of it are higher. They're really getting a bid today. Part of that has to do with NVIDIA shares just rallying. That's leading to a broader move higher when it comes to semis.
Yeah, Brian Deese of the Economic Council over at the White House telling us how much that they're talking to these chip manufacturers, how they're looking to try and ease some of the supply chain headaches to invest alongside them. Meanwhile, we look at an S&P 500 that charges up 0.9%. The big tech, as you say, all about the chip makers, all about the NASDAQ today, 1.3% higher, 181 points to the green. And we're seeing the Dow Jones Industrial Average, the cyclicals, once again, kind of a laggard. We're up 0.7%, 237. And we're seeing the Russell 2000 up 15 points, that's 0.7% higher, Katie.
Well, if we look under the hood at the sector level, like you said, Caroline, I mean, you have Infotech right out in front. That sector up nearly 2% today. Really, every sector is up right now, except for oil. The energy stocks, you can see down about 0.3%. It doesn't help that oil price is down about 3.3% right now.
Take a look at some of the individual movers, Katie, as we do at this time. We'd mentioned a few of these in some of our top calls as well. Darden Restaurants, Caroline, looking a little bit better than expected. When you take a look at forward guidance, shares are still up about 2%. Caroline is very long breadsticks.
We've never gone. We need
on
to go.
This program, Baird analysts saying, look, the results were not as bad as feared. Yes, Caroline, we will go and have our day on our team outing. We can do that. Take a look at KB Homes as well. You're off just more than 5% or so. The first quarter results were a little bit worse than expected. And this is a company that is still flagging delivery issues, supply chain disruptions. So that certainly is still a headwind. Nikola, analysts had an investor day. They got to drive some of the trucks. I believe it was a JP Morgan analyst. Those shares are up 3%, saying that they visited the manufacturing site. They're really excited about the company. It's real. It exists. And Spotify is also, it's mostly unch on the day, but earlier moving a lot higher. Coming up with a partnership with Google and looking at sort of this direct billing, analysts hoping that it simplifies the sign-up process.
Yeah, Tim, of course, he was really breaking down how important that deal was after the bell yesterday. Let's have a look at what's really important once again on the day, the almighty move higher in yields. And we had taken a breath over the yesterday in terms of yields push higher, but once again, the two-year ones in excess of, again, we're now at 2.12%, having cracked that 2% just at the beginning of the week. But this is a global bond sell-off, Carol.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's been, certainly the bond market, the global bond market has been one of our big stories this week. What's interesting, on a day when I look at the most read on the Bloomberg terminal in the past 8 hours is a story about how an opinion column about the West must save globalization. I'm thinking about what's going on in Europe. What are the implications? How is the world being redivided potentially going forward? We did hear from the NATO Secretary General, Jens Stoltenberg, issuing really a warning earlier from this Brussels meeting. And here's what he had to say.
Any use of chemical weapons will totally change the nature of the conflict. It will be a blatant violation of international law, and it will have widespread consequences.
And again, that's the NATO Secretary General, Jens Stoltenberg. But it's just, here we are in a week where we're obviously, focusing so much on things domestically, what it means for monetary policy. But I do think about, it's amazing, Tim, that we're having these kinds of conversations right now, something very akin to, go back to World War I or World War II.
Well, then that's exactly what, the quote-unquote West wants to avoid is another world war. And when I hear the Jens Stoltenberg say something like that, and I wonder to what extent other countries actually have the power to change whatever they're doing now, and how it actually changes the dynamic in Ukraine. So what does change if Russia was to use chemical weapons? I don't actually know.
It is amazing that we're having this conversation. We're looking at an equity market that is just off to the races.
Yeah.
I mean, really for most of the past 2 years, it's been amazing to watch how, what the feeling on the ground is out of step, what is happening in the equity markets, especially feels that way today and this week and this month.
And how much that has to do with central banks. It's interesting, of course, Stoltenberg himself no longer going to go and head up his own central bank in Norway, but going to remain another year on the job at heading up NATO because that role is so crucial right now. But the real key here is whether or not Europe decides that enough is enough and they have to focus in on energy. They have to disassociate themselves from Russia. They have to look at sanctions there. That is when we start to see the oil price volatility really come to the fore.
And the inflationary pressure is underway as we bring it back to the U.S. as well. I think Morgan Stanley out with a huge note, looking at 50 basis points for the Fed to move in May, an additional 50 in June, and 25 basis points in every meeting after that, looking at a peak Fed funds rate now of about 3%. So you have many, many economists thinking this is a Federal Reserve that needs to be on the move.
Well, we just talked with, and I think you guys did too, Bruce Van Saun, CEO over at Citizens Financial Group, upbeat about the economy, thinking the housing market will continue, home buying will continue at this point, and talking about the Fed, needing to, right, Tim, be a little bit more aggressive.
Yeah, and he actually did also say 50 basis point hike, not just at the next meeting, but the meeting after that as well. And then perhaps the Fed could actually kind of sit on its hands for a little while and let things come down. But that would mean we'd get to, 1.25% in just a couple of months.
Quickly. And I mean, what that means for the terminal rate, the destination of this hiking cycle, I mean, maybe you have equity investors thinking it won't be that high, it won't be that different than what was previously expected if we are front-loading a ton of these hikes. Maybe that could explain some of the equity market resilience, but it is a head-scratcher.
Tell that to the mortgage owners.
Yes.
I think your 30-year mortgage rate jumped up today to about 4.4%, some of the highest that we've seen in a few years, Carol.
Yeah.
You think about the impact. I'm not sure the math looks favorably at any refinances at this moment.
Right. So does it make some people jump and get off the fence before the rates go even higher if they can find a home, or does it slow down?
Yeah, does it slow down the housing market at all?
Hasn't so far, right?
No, it absolutely hasn't.
It's kind of crazy. All right, folks, we're going to continue our conversation. We'll be back in less than an hour's time. Beyond the Bell coming your way at 4 p.m. Wall Street time on radio, TV, and YouTube. We will count you down to the close on this Thursday.
This is Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Bloomberg Quick Takes Tim Stenovic on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, you are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Masser, Tim Stenovic will rejoin our TV colleagues, Katie, Caroline, and Taylor at 4 p.m. Wall Street time. Because I have a bit of a bummer. I didn't mean to bring, I know we were talking breadsticks, which are fun.
Yeah, those are
Darn,
fun.
but
Chemical weapons, you mean?
I feel like it's really heavy. It has been for a while, but I see those headlines cross and I'm like, what?
Well, it's interesting because, look, and I'm not an international relations expert, but
I remember a course in college about like weapons of mass destruction and learning about ICBMs, like learning about weapons and things. And so here we are.
Right, we studied, the Cuban Missile Crisis, we studied
Right?
ICBMs, and, we studied mutually assured destruction, and all in the context of these are things of the past, and we have this understanding that the United States and Russia actually inspect each other's nuclear weapons in order to make sure that everybody's staying compliant to the treaties.
Right.
So I go back to what, Jens Stoltenberg said, and I wonder what that change looks like coming from NATO countries, coming from the United States, if Putin does end up using chemical weapons in Ukraine, because what more can we do without actually getting involved?
And we've seen
directly
chemical weapons used in the last few years, right? And
Syria.
Right. And so you just do wonder, what would be the steps to take and what steps will be taken. I don't know. I just keep looking at, again, I think about history. You see these companies pulling back increasingly, and do they ever go back, or certainly not for maybe a while?
An interesting question during Biden's press conference earlier today came from somebody who asked if he thinks that Ukraine should actually look to cede part of its territory as part of a way to negotiate with Putin and get Russian forces out of there. And the president answered by saying, hey, that's for Ukrainians and Ukraine to decide. That's not for me to weigh in on.
Yeah, which is right. Like you do wonder, how do you put this to an end?
Yeah.
And can you come to some kind of resolution where Ukraine is still an independent country and you appease President Putin, hopefully forever?
Hopefully.
All right, you're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Master, Tim Stanovic. Let's head on over back to D.C. Lots going on. Nancy Lyons covering it all in World and National News. Hey, Nance.
Thanks, Carol. President Biden says the U.S. and its allies remain firmly united in efforts to help Ukraine during the ongoing Russian invasion. Following meetings today in Brussels with our allies, Biden says the U.S. is ready to provide more support for Ukraine.
I'm announcing the United States is prepared to commit more than $1 billion in humanitarian assistance to help get relief to millions of Ukrainians affected by the war in Ukraine.
Biden will be traveling to Poland during this trip to meet with some of the Ukrainian refugees. He's also promised the U.S. will take in at least 100,000 of them. Closer to home, President Biden is preparing to ask Congress to boost national security funding in what one White House official calls one of the biggest national security investments in American history.
The president plans to request more than $813 billion in national security spending in the federal budget he'll send to Congress on Monday. Sources tell Bloomberg News the president is looking for an increase of 4%, about $31 billion. The budget reflects the increasing military challenge from China, upgrading the nuclear arsenal, and the development of new defense systems like hypersonic weapons. It will likely find support in Congress because of increasing tensions with Russia. In Washington, I'm Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
The House committee investigating the Capitol riot will vote next week on whether to consider contempt of Congress charges for 2 aides to former President Donald Trump. The committee on Monday will discuss whether to recommend referring for potential prosecution Trump's former trade advisor, Peter Navarro, and Trump's one-time chief of staff for communications, Dan Scavino. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Nancy Lyons. This is Bloomberg.
All right, Nance, thank you so much. Few headlines, certainly when it comes to the war in Ukraine that we wanted to bring